last few people here. So I am running tech support in the background, so I'll do my best to both be the hostess with the mostest and the tech guy. But if people have questions, definitely use the chat box. And with that, I'll turn things over to you, Administrator Nestler.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. We were really pleased when we saw we were going to get a strong turnout. Can you hear me?
Can hear you. Yep.
Okay, thank you. So I just wanted to thank you for being here. Your participation is so important to us. The value that you add as freight leaders really helps us to understand the freight challenges and the opportunities in front of us, and it informs our policy decisions and related plans. So your feedback is critical. Your input helped us with the state freight rail plan, and that identified our process for how we identify, plan, and prioritize projects that address the needs of our freight industry. It helped us meet a requirement of the FAST Act, which the plan helps us secure $20 million a year for of national freight program funding. So big value and big dollars. Additionally, the activities of this committee helps us stay engaged, focused, and productive related to our goal for enhancing freight and transportation in Wisconsin. So really look forward to the meeting today. Thank you for being here. And with that, I'd like to introduce my boss, Secretary Craig Thompson.
Thanks, Joe. And I thank all of you for being here this morning for this meeting. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate the opportunity to welcome you all to our January 2021 Freight Advisory Committee. Today, you're going to have an opportunity to hear from industry experts on the trends in freight shipping that we're seeing. You'll also hear updates on developments in multimodal facilities and Northwoods Rail, as well as you're going to receive updates on our freight plan, our freight rail plan, and our master plan for the state's transportation system, Connect 2050. You know, when the pandemic first hit, we understood the vital importance of keeping freight moving, whether you were responding to the increased demand for groceries and household products or getting vital medical supplies where they needed to go. The freight industry was on the front lines of helping our state and nation respond to the pandemic. We responded by easing CDL restrictions and keeping our rest areas open and sanitized to give drivers breaks that they needed when many private businesses were closed. This was really just one more example of the partnership between WisDOT and the freight industry that really has served Wisconsin so well. As you guys know better than anyone, the movement of products and commodities is the lifeblood of our economy, affecting nearly every aspect of our lives. So it stands to reason that when millions of Americans suddenly change the way they live, we can expect to see a profound impact on what's being shipped, where, and how. And that's what we have seen in the wake of the pandemic. What people bought changed dramatically, causing certain industry sectors to flounder while others saw a dramatic increase in sales. The sudden demand for household items, technology, paper, and sanitation products, and other items initially created shortages, and then a boom in container shipping of imports. And the way people purchase products also changed. The demand for home delivery caused the trend in online shopping, which we all know had already been growing, to skyrocket. All kinds of logistics systems, from the Amazons and Walmarts of the world to your neighborhood Uber driver, were initially overwhelmed, but they've innovated new ways to support the delivery economy. So as other kinds of traffic decreased, the amount of freight moving through Wisconsin's transportation system, well, it actually grew. As I've said, many of these developments accelerated trends that we'd already been seeing. What remains to be seen is what the new normal is going to look like when we come to the day when this pandemic is finally behind us. And I hope that's very, very soon. Given the volatility and unpredictable nature of this last year, no one can confidently predict where our economy will be a year from now, or which of the trends that emerged during this pandemic will become lasting changes. At the same time, we don't have the luxury to stand by and see what develops. One thing I can predict with confidence is that a modern, safe, and efficient multimodal transportation system will help Wisconsin weather any challenges that we face and take advantage of future opportunities. That's why we've been proceeding full speed ahead on our efforts to improve our roads and highways. We had more than 300 road projects scheduled going into this year, and we kept them all on schedule and even move some of them ahead. This committee has identified intermodal freight transport as a top priority. And so we've been encouraged by Canadian National's plan to open its new terminal in New Richmond. We still clearly need more multimodal shipping capacity in Wisconsin, especially on the Lake Michigan side, but this represents real progress. And as we keep our efforts in the present, we're also planning for the future. The rapid pace of social and economic change is matched by the rapid advancement of transportation technology, from real-time traffic management systems to advancements in air traffic control to the advent of connected and automated vehicles. In order for us to ensure that the people of Wisconsin and our industries can compete and thrive in this changing technological future, our time to plan is right now. And that's why we're here this morning. You're going to hear updates on how we've been working with industry partners and transportation stakeholders, including many of you on this call, to plan for the future of Wisconsin's transportation. As we do so, we're going to continue to rely on our partnerships with all of you in the freight industry and our stakeholders to help us develop the kind of efficient, safe transportation system that the people of this state deserve. Again, I really want to thank everybody for being on the call this morning. I plan to attend the majority of this meeting. And again, I just thank you for your participation and look forward to having a productive meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And now I'll turn things over to Chuck Wade.
Thanks, Sean. Again, I just want to reiterate our appreciation for you taking time out of your days to meet with us. Your input has been very valuable to us over the years, and it will continue to be so as we engage in our long-range planning efforts. I want to start by recapping last meeting. The last time this group met was back in November of 2019, and then of course everybody knows the pandemic hit us in March and kind of changed the way we did business. But we continue to reach out to stakeholder groups and that type of thing. So at that meeting, we learned more about last mile delivery in Wisconsin, and we had a panel and tabletop discussion at that meeting. We learned that, companies are already testing new technology, such as electric and natural gas powered vehicles with auto start and stop technology. We learned that e-commerce is driving infrastructure demand changes. Learned a little bit about how Amazon facilities are operating, being built in Kenosha, Beloit, and Oak Creek. We learned that demand for last mile deliveries at that time might mean new carriers with inexperienced drivers, and safety concerns was the topic at that meeting. That there was major need for on-demand information for things like road incidents, weather, and package location for timely delivery modifications. Also at that meeting, we briefed you on WisDOT's project prioritization methodology. Our director of our Bureau of State Highway Programs, Jeff Gust, explained our 6-step cycle that we use in our asset management program and how that drives decisions on how public funding for road projects happens. We also learned more about, at that time, the multimodal local supplement program. It was a one-time $75 million general purpose revenue funded program. As a result of the veto that happened over in July 2020, that program moved back into our local road improvement program. It's now called LRIP-S supplemental, and we looked at project eligibility as part of that. The good news on that is that it went from 75 million back to 90 million as part of that, and we have 137 projects that are funded and moving forward on that. We had panel and tabletop discussion on local level freight planning. And as part of that, Jennifer Murray, which is the planning chief in the Bureau of Planning and Economic Development, moderated a panel of our MPOs, Metropolitan Planning Organizations, and Regional Plan Commissions, who are also partners and implement a lot of the highway program in terms of funding and in the urbanized areas and regional areas. So with that, I want to jump into currently kind of what we did over 2020 and 2021 in terms of the update. Right now, we have ongoing efforts to support transportation projects impacting industry. As folks know, we had started a program to allow grants for regional studies on intermodal. We had East Central Regional Planning Commission actually apply for a grant up in Northeast Wisconsin. They had put out an RFP, and they have a consultant that's starting work on that effort. So that's great. That program can support studies up to $200,000, and it's ongoing. We continue to have our Harbor Assistance Program, our Freight Rail Infrastructure Improvement Program, our Freight Rail Preservation Program, and Transportation Economic Assistance, and State Infrastructure Bank programs. These are loan and grant programs that have had several $1 million worth of grants or loans over the past year. In addition, we continue to work with state and federal entities to monitor economic development, EDA disaster supplemental funding, CARES Act funding, and try to work with our stakeholders to try to get that funding available for projects that are out there or opportunities. We do state partnerships between the agencies. Right now, we participated and helped support with WEDC on the Rural Prosperity Initiatives. Kellyanne Blazek is going to be presenting a little bit on that effort, which is of interest to rural operations out statewide. So we're happy to say that we helped get the word out on that, and some interesting things that she'll talk about with that. And just to wrap up the update, we do continue to work with the University of Wisconsin, and we do administer the Mid-America Freight Coalition, which includes the 10 MASTO states. It's a pooled fund that supports a number of regional studies around freight topics. And Dr. Ernie Perry is a member of this group, and so he also has talked about this in the past. But just to highlight the success there, the truck parking information management system, the MAFC handles the data side of things, the research and data piece of that, but that's been a successful system that's been implemented across many states in the Midwest area. And so MAFC has an important role in things like that. And as we'll discuss today, a major reason for bringing everybody together now is we're engaging on a number of long-range transportation planning efforts, and your input is vital into preparing those long-range plans. And so we're looking forward to giving you opportunities to provide input into that. Now, I want to switch gears just to wrap up my portion of the presentation today and talk about new members. So we have 2 new appointments to the group. And before I do that, I do want to thank Dean Hain, who is the former Wisconsin Commercial Ports Association president, for being a longtime member, and congratulate him on his efforts that he's done there in retirement. And then congratulate Michael Friedlander, who also retired from the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources earlier this year. To replace them, we have 2 new appointments. We have Adam Tyndall-Schlitt, who is the president now for the Wisconsin Commercial Ports Association. And if Adam, if you're on, if you just want to introduce yourself and maybe give a few words about your role and kind of what you're looking forward to as participation in this group, I'll give you that opportunity now. Is Adam on the call?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Good morning. And good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Adam Tyndall-Schlitt. It's my pleasure to be with the FAC this morning, both in my capacity as director of the Port of Milwaukee and as recently elected president of the Wisconsin Commercial Ports Association. Later today, I will highlight the work of the WCPA and the important role of our Wisconsin's maritime economy in supporting the handling of freight. We do have a couple slides for you to dig into that. At this juncture, I will just say it is my pleasure and to carry on the important work that Dean Hain has long represented on the FAC on behalf of Wisconsin's commercial ports. I know that Dean intends to stay very involved in all freight planning throughout the state in his ongoing capacity as director of the Port of Green Bay. So Dean will continue to be a very familiar and active face for those in states, the Wisconsin State Freight Plan, and certainly our maritime industry. A little bit about me for those that I haven't met. I've been director of the Port of Milwaukee for 2.5 years, again, elected president of the WCPA earlier this year. And it's really been a pleasure to work with our partners at the state and throughout Wisconsin, both in public and private industry. I've been humbled to not only serve as a commissioner in the Southeastern Regional Planning Commission on the nomination of our governor, Tony Evers, but also supporting our friends and colleagues in the trade as a board member of the Logistics Council of Milwaukee. So really trying to support our industry and support Wisconsin's economy in a multitude of ways, in addition to my day job as director of the Port of Milwaukee. Again, we'll share more about the WCPA in some slides ahead, and thank you again.
Thanks, Adam. Our second appointment is David Bissett with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. Dave, if you're on, if you want to mention a few words about your experience and your role here with the Freight Advisory Committee. Thanks, Dave.
Absolutely. I hope everyone can hear me okay. My name, again, David Bizot, and thanks for welcoming me to this group. I'm really happy to be here. I am replacing Michael Freelander, who, as Chuck mentioned, recently retired from our agency. I'm in the DNR air program. I have a background in transportation and air quality. I am currently serving as a policy analyst, but I'm a former supervisor in air program, where my portfolio included handling all mobile source related issues and transportation activities related to transportation and air quality. Before I came to DNR, I served with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency in their Office of Transportation and Air Quality, where I worked primarily on assessing the air quality impacts of transportation projects, kind of project level impacts on air quality. Just really excited to be with this group. You know, from an air quality perspective, transportation sector continues to be a major source of air emissions, and in some cases is the largest sector for air emissions, whether that's particulate matter or ozone forming compounds. So those are issues I think very important to us here in the air program. So we continue to want to keep an eye on the trends, particularly in goods management and freight. A lot of the parts of the sector that contribute to air emissions are associated with freight and goods movement, whether that be heavy duty trucks or rail or commercial marine in our port areas. So it's important to us here in the program that we keep an eye on trends in the industry and kind of what's coming up here in Wisconsin and what to expect in terms of changes in that sector. So I'm really excited to be part of this group, and thanks for having me here today.
Thanks, David. That wraps up what I have for you here today. Again, we look forward to getting your feedback, not only as part of this group, but through our other opportunities as we do our long-range planning. And with that, I look forward to hearing what the discussion today. Thanks.
Thanks, Chuck. Now we'll move on to hearing from voices of Wisconsin's freight-related industries. As you recall, I sent out a survey before the meeting, and in that survey we had asked if individuals wanted to speak on behalf of their industry. So I really appreciate those who offer to participate, and we'll get right into our first FAC member, which you just heard from is Mr. Tyndall Schlitt.
Again, good morning, everyone. Next slide, please. So just a little bit by way of background, and I apologize for those that are familiar with the work of Wisconsin's commercial ports. But on Lake Michigan and Lake Superior alone, the state of Wisconsin has over 1,000 miles of waterfront property, both which is an active commercial and recreational use on a daily basis. Almost 42 million tons of cargo are handled by our state's commercial ports, mostly the 7 which are deep drafts. So historically, Wisconsin's most commercially active port is Superior in coordination with Duluth, Milwaukee being the second most traditionally commercially active port, Green Bay being third. We've seen increased vibrancy and utilization of Wisconsin's based shipyards. There has been a tremendous amount of contract activity, which the state has supported. Recent awards for building of new U.S. Navy vessels, as well as the ongoing build of the first Laker, the Mark W. Barker, which will be owned by Interlake, supporting a lot of that activity that you see in Superior, Green Bay, and Milwaukee once that vessel moves into active service, which we believe could happen as early as the end of this year, but more likely 2022. All told, the 42 million tons of cargo that we handle on the water through Wisconsin's commercial ports generates $1.4 billion in state-based revenue each year. And that's just on the Great Lakes side. There's a bunch of supplemental data that speaks to the work that takes place on the Mississippi River through ports like La Crosse, Prairie du Chien, and others as well. Next slide, please. So a little bit of our association and the work that we do to support Wisconsin's ports and the handling of freight via maritime. We were founded in 2001, so this year we're celebrating 20 years. The largest gathering that we host each year is our annual meeting, traditionally held in August. This year we had robust participation from our virtual meeting, including 62 attendees, 11 panelists, which included folks like Governor Evers, WisDOT, Senator Tammy Baldwin, Congressman Mike Gallagher. It really was bipartisan support for Wisconsin's commercial ports at our annual meeting. Should the vaccine rollout continue successfully, we are very hopeful that we will be able to return to an in-person meeting in August of 2021 in Washburn. Again, our membership is primarily ports and coastal communities, cities, towns, and villages from Lake Michigan, Lake Superior, and the Mississippi. Not only that are involved in the commercial handling of freight, but also supporting recreational use of our harbors, as well as fishing and other activities on which Wisconsinites and our tourist visitors love to access our water. Next slide, please. So I want to give a shout out to WisDOT. For those that saw the advanced documentation for today's FAC meeting, the white paper really was a comprehensive breakdown of the state of things under COVID. And I wanted to drill down into a couple of those key facts from a maritime perspective. So right now we estimate that at least $3.5 billion in needed federal relief is needed nationwide for supporting U.S. Port authorities and their commercial handling of freight throughout the country. Now, the current call is for about $1.5 billion in expected transportation-related relief, which we are optimistic that the incoming administration will support with a new transportation infrastructure bill. Obviously, Wisconsin's ports, commercial port workforce is designated as essential under current U.S. Department of Homeland Security policy, and our frontline workers have directly supported the ongoing handling of freight, manufacturing and distribution services throughout the pandemic. Now, one thing that is of nuance is due to the sort of broad-based lack of intermodal container services throughout the state. What you see at a lot of Wisconsin's commercial ports is the handling of non-containerized goods. So you're going to see steel, grain, bulk products, break bulk products, really not going to see that robust containerized traffic at Wisconsin's commercial ports that you would see on some of the larger megaports on the U.S. East and West Coast. Again, what you're seeing nationwide on average, Port Authority's commercial performance is down about 15%, and some of that pain is being felt even more robustly within the state right now. Port of Green Bay is down approximately 20% at last estimate, and the Port of Superior, again with Duluth, one of the top 15 largest ports in the country, is down about 30%. So it's been a difficult ride during COVID, but our maritime handling of freight at commercial ports is, if nothing else, resilient. One other key piece that we wanted to highlight was just what the known backlog of infrastructure-related projects throughout Wisconsin's coastal communities. This is freight-related and non-freight related. One exercise that the Wisconsin Department of Transportation supports each year is the collection of statement of intention data, where we rely to the state our known infrastructure backlog to address preventative maintenance issues, infrastructure issues, transportation issues, and needed development to sustain our handling of freight. Many Wisconsin port authorities are decades old, and at last estimate, the WCPA believes that right now only 35% of known preventative maintenance at Wisconsin's commercial ports is being successfully addressed through a combination of local, state, and federal funding. And again, that it sort of ties in with the statement of intention data, which we relay to the state April 1st of each year. Next slide, please. One of the great blessings of the state of Wisconsin and what WisDOT does to support the maritime industry and our ability to support commercial freight handling is the Harbor Assistance Program, which has been previously mentioned. This is really a unique feature of what the state does, and it's a tremendous lifeline and backbone for our work. Earlier this year, the Secretary and the Governor announced, in December of last year, announced the latest round of Harbor Assistance Program funds, and it's truly a backbone and a lifeline for our ongoing work. And I think WisDOT does a really brilliant job of supporting development in cities large, towns tiny, making sure that the impact of the HAP is felt throughout the state. And I can't reiterate enough how important this is to not only the commercial ports that are members of the WCPA, but some of those other towns and villages that are not our members, but also rely on waterfront related development and support through the state. I will take a moment to add one other factor, which is the state of Wisconsin's ongoing commitment to having a maritime specialist at WisDOT is a national standard that is fairly unique. And we have been very, very excited to welcome Mike Halstead into the commercial maritime world. And we are incredibly appreciative of Mike's ongoing commitments and work with us. And obviously, thank you, Mr. Secretary, for ensuring that that position remains funded throughout the budgetary process. It is a unique standard for how a state Department of Transportation can support maritime. On a personal note, on behalf of all commercial ports, I will add that our friend Mike Halstead, we are thinking about you. I know it's been a difficult couple weeks and days for you and your family, and you've been in our thoughts and prayers. Finally, next slide. Just to highlight some of what we are looking at to support our ability to keep handling freight and be the maritime backbone for the state of Wisconsin. WCPA is advancing a significant increase in Harbor Assistance Program funding in the next biennial. We estimate that should this improve to $30 to $50 million a year, that 65% preventative maintenance infrastructure backlog could be addressed in a really immediate way as more people turn to multimodal handling of freight via maritime in the years ahead. WisDOT recently funded the Port Infrastructure Development Program, and the Port of Milwaukee, which I lead, was the first recipient of those funds. And now, as president of the WCPA, I'll be working with our member ports, hopefully to bring in more of that federal funding to support ongoing development throughout the state, not only in Milwaukee, but all of our state's commercial deep draft ports. Obviously, the Harbor Maintenance Trust and its increased utilization via the Army Corps of Engineers is a critical priority to address the backlog of federal infrastructure, which supports, protects, and enhances the state of Wisconsin's waterfronts and commercial properties, residential properties, and recreational properties on Lake Michigan, Lake Superior, and the Mississippi. And I will add the Soo Lock. The federal government in recent years, after 30 years of considering it, is moving forward with a renewal of a new Soo Lock. And this is of critical importance for the handling of freight through the Port of Superior in particular, again, Wisconsin's largest port. And we are thrilled that the Trump administration and ideally the Biden administration will continue with necessary federal funding to support this new Soo Lock and sustain the ongoing handling of freight at Wisconsin's largest port, Superior. With that, I thank you again for the opportunity and your indulgence. Have a great meeting, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Tyndall-Schlitt. Now we'll move on to Mr. Larry Kruger.
Good morning. I am Larry Krieger with the Lake States Lumber Association. The Lake States Lumber Association is a Midwest-based organization. It includes a bunch of sawmills, lumber producers, lumber distributors, and different manufacturers that use lumber. So you can think furniture, railroad ties, moldings, kitchen cabinets, etc. Our membership also includes various support and affiliated organizations like insurance companies, equipment manufacturers, state agencies, and others. While we are based in the Midwest, we have members from all over the United States and Canada. So you're thinking forestry in Wisconsin. Well, I like to tell people why Wisconsin is definitely a cheesehead state. We are also a forestry state. 46% of our state is woodland. The Wisconsin forest industry employs about 13% of the people working in our state. Of all the hardwood lumber produced in the United States, about half is exported. That's about $4 billion, folks. Of $4 billion, half of that used to go to China. Unfortunately, with the trade wars that started in 2018, most of the hardwood was hit with a 25% tariff, and that tariff devastated our hardwood industry. And to make matters even worse, the hardwood industry did not receive any of the tariff relief that our farmers did. So now for some good news. The China tariffs ended in February. We had some increase in demand, and of course that was right before the COVID virus shut down the Chinese economy. So for a while, our biggest hardwood customer, China, bought very little hardwood. This depressed the price of hardwood. And to make things even worse, a very large paper mill in Wisconsin shut down. That paper mill used to consume 25% of the wood fiber in our state. That closure really hurt Wisconsin logging. Production went way down, people could not sell their wood, and prices dropped. So we had very low prices and very low production for most of 2020. And now for some good news. China, through a series of very strict regulations on its population and very strict mask wearing, got a handle on their COVID problem. They're back to socializing, they're going out to restaurants and bars, and more importantly, they're back to work. Demand for hardwood is way up. Vietnam, another big buyer of US hardwood, also got a handle on their COVID virus and have increased their demand for hardwood. So this sudden big increase in demand quickly used up most of the hardwood inventory and production in our state. So now prices have finally started to increase from those very low prices they were before. All this good news is a bit tempered by Wisconsin's perennial problem. How do we get our products to our customers? When you think about all the imports to our states and all the exports, agriculture, dairy, manufacturing, it all goes, or pretty much all goes, by container, those big metal boxes. And most of those containers still go by truck over our roadways to intermodal terminals in other states. I'm pleased to see the new Canadian National Rail Terminal that was in New Richmond, Wisconsin. I looked it up on the map. That new terminal is about 70 miles west of the existing Canadian National Terminal in Chippewa Falls. And it's about, 45 miles from the Canadian Pacific Rail Terminal in Minneapolis. As our Secretary of Transportation, Thompson, just said, that still leaves a good portion of our state poorly served by the rail industry. It's the eastern portion of Wisconsin, the portion with the large population centers from Milwaukee to Green Bay, a portion of Wisconsin that also includes one heck of a lot of manufacturing and agriculture that could use an efficient, cost-saving container rail yard. I really wish I knew how to help improve the rail service for our state, because we could really use it. Anyway, that's all I have.
Thanks, Larry. Now we'll move on to Mr. Jason Collada.
Well, thanks, John. And I really want to thank the department for putting on this freight advisory meeting. It's a fantastic opportunity for folks to exchange, and really pleased with a lot of the folks you've got on the agenda today. So if you please flip the screen there, Sean. Oh, I'm sorry. You went too far. Oh, you must not have me loaded up.
I'm sorry about that, Jason.
That's all right. It's in the packets, folks. So I just wanted to share a little bit about the conditions that the folks in our industry are seeing, and it's probably widespread with those in other industries, and just share with the group. So first of all, the outbound freight market is really tight right now. It's a combination of a lot of volume and a shortage of drivers that is really pinching the market. So for much of the first half of the year, of course, things really slowed down, and demand wasn't there. It certainly was in the food industry. We've been moving a lot of product, but we've seen capacity in the truck market really tighten up. And from what the folks are telling me in the industry, it looks like it's going to be further into, as far as we can tell, into 2021. And so that's putting pressure on costs, which is always a challenge when you're trying to manage a budget. Driver ranks have really been depleted. I talked with my colleague, Neil Kedzie from the motor carriers, and he shared that we're short about 60,000 drivers nationally. And from our industry's vantage point, the generous unemployment benefits that had been offered through much of 2020, the COVID virus itself, and the construction industry has been very healthy and robust, and a lot of truck drivers have left driving to go into that industry. And so we've seen this shortage happen at a time when we really need additional drivers. There's an issue that I think the department's going to talk about later today that our industry, and I'm sure others, are concerned about, and that's this Federal Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse. This is an FMCSA safety initiative, and it's impacted somewhere between 25 and 35,000 drivers. And the challenge for employers is not only must they verify themselves annually through the system, but they must verify all of their drivers through the system annually as well. And once a driver's name is on that list, the perception I'm hearing, and this, I want to hear the department talk about this, is that driver cannot be employed. And so that's taken a large number of folks off the playing field. And I'm certain there's some that should be, but the concern is how do you rehabilitate or get drivers who can be able to safely serve again back into the workforce. And I'm told that that's driven a lot of older drivers into retirement. And so again, a tough time for us to have a shrinking driver pool. So then that begs the question, okay, if we're losing drivers on the back end, how can we add drivers on the front end? And this gets to be a real challenge. We were pleased to see FMCSA did allow for 18 to 20-year-old drivers of commercial motor vehicles. And so we'll see how much that's helpful. There's always opportunities. I know women and minority drivers those populations are well underrepresented in driving, but the closure of driving schools due to the COVID situation has also not helped furnish new drivers on the front end. And so, of course, we always turn to the workforce agencies, the tech college system, other things to do to help expedite and return or add new drivers to those available to drive. And then I just wanted to touch on some other freight issues that we're hearing. I put in my slide deck, I said concern with IOH implements of husbandry restrictions. And I've got to say, we actually had very few issues with that state law. I did just want to suggest for the department staff, some of the towns have been going to a 5-year renewal period. And the suggestion was made by some of our ag folks, why couldn't we make that, look at doing a longer term renewal of those permits on broader basis than just at the town level. So we continue to have a lot of demand with our product. We mostly can and freeze vegetables. We have members that do other things as well, but that's the lion's share of our association's work. And there's a lot of intra-plant moves between a plant that might initially process to one that might finally can or freeze before the product moves to market. And so that continues to be a challenge that just uses a lot of truck capacity. Preservation and use of freight rail. Wisconsin Southern serves more of our facilities than any other rail provider in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Illinois. And so it's really significant that the state, for the 40 years or so that we've been doing this, has invested in that system, and that's paid dividends. And especially with this tight truck capacity, that's an alternative. And I do have members who have been actively exploring freight rail that had not previously, partly because of that. And then it's already been talked about a bit, but the continued growth of intermodal hubs has been we're very interested to see that happen. Union Pacific announced this month they're beginning a domestic service in Minneapolis. And it's a lane that goes to California. And we do have members in both states, Wisconsin, Minnesota, who are interested in taking advantage of that. And we're curious to see. Larry talked about New Richmond, as did others, the secretary and others. We don't know yet if that's going to be domestic service available or just international, but we're eager to see those types of opportunities grow. We do want to see, just like Larry said, the eastern part of the state, there's a lot more freight density, and we think opportunity for further options and to reduce dray miles down to Chicago or to the Twin Cities. And then the last thing I just wanted to mention on that subject, Wall Street Journal reported earlier this week, nearly 2 million containers will be imported through American ports this month. That is a record. They've never handled so many. And so I don't know what's all driving that on the import side, because of course we're a big export state, but I just thought that was significant and really a sign of the times. So again, I just wanted to, Sean and the department staff, thank you for having us, and it's great to have this exchange.
Well, thank you, Jason. And ending with intermodal is a great segue into our next subject for our presentation. So thanks for that too. So with that, we'll move on to intermodal updates from Rich and Dave.
Thank you very much, Sean, and good morning to all. When we talked about when we last had our Freight Advisory Committee meeting in 2019, we were transitioning from the intermodal subcommittee work that we had done in 2018 and 2019 through the report, and then through sharing the information from the report with the FAC. Again, the intermodal subcommittee was the first subcommittee off of the FAC. We did a rollout of 2 summits working with local economic development organizations who sponsored the summits in a way to try and move the efforts into the private sector. We had great leadership from the Metropolitan Milwaukee Association of Commerce for their summit on November 5th, 2019, and then up in Appleton on November 11th with New North. The structures of these summits started with a WisDOT presentation on the report, and then went into panel sessions with Q&A from the attendees. The goals basically for these summits were, first of all, to provide a forum where all the parties really could get together in one room and get a clearer understanding of the business models for the transportation side of things, what the providers really needed. Secondly, to give clarity to the beneficial cargo owners, those exporters and importers, regarding the challenges of the intermodal service, and give them an opportunity to express their needs to the service providers. And then also to build the capacity of these regional economic development organizations so they could help understand how they could help facilitate intermodal freight opportunities in their areas. And what came out of those were really positive outcomes. Strong attendance, first of all. Over 100 people attended each event. There were a lot of great feedback messages from the attendees, and there were also anecdotal reports of data sharing. What's one of the key things that we were hoping to come out of it, so that the freight forwarders and the beneficial cargo owners could share the confidential data with the service providers to really document the needs and the opportunities in parts of the state that have been underserved. And again, that gave the private sector the ability to make themselves vocal on their needs, and also to really put the onus on them to take charge of the intermodal conversation. There were still some concerns over the build it and they will come beliefs that need to be addressed, and also what the public sector role has been. So in terms of the public sector role, we've really come to establish that through the state legislature under the existing Freight Rail Infrastructure Improvement Program and the special intermodal grants. And for that, we turn things over to Rich Kedzier to talk about that program.
Thank you, Dave. Good morning, everyone. As a background, the Intermodal Freight Facility Grant Program is a new program. It was authorized in 2019 by the legislature under a state statute 85.093, for folks who like to look things up. Last year, WisDOT awarded 2 grants of $200,000 each to the East Central Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission, based in the Fox Valley, and another to the North Central Wisconsin RPC, that's based in Wausau, for intermodal facility studies, focusing on broad areas around their respective regions. So between the 2 study areas, it really, we think that the coverage of the study areas covers almost about 3/4 of the state. So we're very pleased and looking forward to the results from those studies. The East Central Wisconsin RPC, in partnership with New North, kicked off their intermodal study in December with work tasks to anticipating to occur for about half of the year and concluding in late summer to early fall. So again, we're looking forward with great anticipation of results of that study. The North Central Wisconsin RPC study, we're hopeful that they'll kick off this spring. As far as the future, this grant program, we haven't nailed down any a timeline for future grants, but it is possible WisDOT will hold another round of funding for intermodal facility grants and loans this or next year. Next slide, please. Intermodal facility updates, as you know, Jason mentioned and Larry, the CN will be opening its new auto port and intermodal terminal in New Richmond in St. Croix County. That's anticipated to happen in March. They have not opened that yet. And so look for that, an announcement of that opening. And then, as Jason mentioned, Union Pacific kind of surprised everybody. I guess they've been doing a lot of work in secret, but they announced that they were opening a boutique domestic-only intermodal terminal in Minneapolis at an underused yard, that in an old Chicago Northwestern yard in Minneapolis. And it was unanticipated, but of course it's very welcome and offers more opportunities for Wisconsin shippers moving products to the West Coast and beyond. You know, we anticipate, although only domestic containers are planned to be shipped in and out of this facility, you know, there are opportunities for transshipments to once the containers get to LA, that contents can be transshipped into international containers. And then finally, the Port of Milwaukee awarded a FRAP grant back in 2019. The port anticipates completing its project to rehabilitate track at its intermodal yard on Jones Island. this year, but no word yet on whether CP will resume intermodal operations at the port in 2021. With that, we normally do open up for questions. We do seem to have extra time. Sean, how do you want to handle questions?
Yeah, why don't, if individuals have questions regarding intermodal, just go ahead and turn your mics on or enter them into the chat. Just a reminder, we're going to move on to Northwoods rail lines updates at about 10 o'clock, so we have about 6 minutes for questions.
Rich, Joe Nestler, I've got a question for you. How do you think that boutique facility, like the name, in Minneapolis could impact us? Any speculation at this point with what we know?
Good question, Joe. And so because the Twin Cities is Western Wisconsin, for intermodal purposes, Western Wisconsin really is part of the Twin Cities market as far as shipping, especially if you're shipping very long distances, over 1,000 miles. A Twin Cities terminal, theoretically at least, is not far from Western Wisconsin shippers. Although, traffic being what it is in a major metropolitan area, truckers will have to determine optimal times to enter that terminal. But that said, there are opportunities for ag shippers and forest resource industry shippers to access that terminal and it opens up whole nother market, because the CN terminals based in Chippewa Falls and Duluth, they're really, because CN's primary export terminal is Prince Rupert in Canada, Prince Rupert Island, the shipments to Southern California and more than 1,000 miles away from Prince Rupert it opens up different markets, different shipping lanes.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions? Well, thank you, Rich, and thank you, Dave. Appreciate the update. Why don't we move on now to our Northwoods Rail Lines topic, and speaking will be Lisa Stern and Rich.
Yeah, hi, good morning. My name's Lisa Stern. I'm the Chief of Railroads and Harbors section here at Wisconsin DOT. And we're going to be talking about the Northwoods Rail Lines. You guys just met Rich on the previous agenda item. A little background just on the Northwoods rail situation. For quite a while, WisDOT has been working with the Northwoods Rail Transit Commission, or the Northwoods RTC, and CN, talking together about how do we improve the service in northern Wisconsin, the rail service specifically. We saw rail lines going out of service and into discontinuance, and we've been talking for many years, and then Rhinelander to Goodman line went out of service, and that sort of stepped up the pressure. And then in 2016, we had a big storm up in northern Wisconsin, which damaged quite a couple of bridges and some infrastructure, and on the Ashland line. And then the Ashland to Park Falls part of the rail line went out of service. The cost to improve that infrastructure being economically not viable for CN to bring back into service at this point in time. So around 2018, Wisconsin DOT facilitated the 2018 Wisconsin Northwoods Freight Rail Study, kind of evaluating, just the viability of rail service in North Wisconsin and the UP. So the finding of that did find that rail service is viable, but it needed improved conditions, including infrastructure. After that, it brought to what are, WisDOT kind of had to take a step back and say, what are our goals in the freight rail program as it regards to the Northwoods Rail? Number one is to support the shippers and the communities in the Northwood counties, and to support the forest resource industries of Wisconsin. As we heard earlier this morning from Larry, it is a very important part of Wisconsin's industry and economy. And also, ideally what we would like to do is to support the private investment of the Northwoods rail lines. I know there's been talk about the state coming in with our FRAP program, but really we should be the buyer or the investor of last resort. So we're really looking for ways to support the private investment to bring a good rail service back up into the Northwoods. So as we're working through all this year, earlier this year, CN, you can go to the next slide, announced a big change, a big opportunity with CN Northwoods divestiture plan. And they announced over 625 miles that they were planning to sell in Wisconsin and Michigan. They got their RFP process going. I know it's in the works right now. You can see here these lines. It includes the two main points that we were talking about, that Rhinelander to Goodman line, the east-west through northern Wisconsin, and then the Ashland to Park Falls. Those are kind of what spurred this whole conversation. And they are as part of the sale. And of course, the department is, as well as the Northwoods Rail Transit Commission, are very keen on seeing that part of the sale, that the service on those lines gets reestablished. Right now, we don't have much to say. The RFP process is ongoing. CN is, I think, talking and evaluating what their next steps are and talking to potential operators. That's really all I have. Rich, do you have anything you'd like to add to the status update?
Not too much, Lisa, just because those discussions between operators and CN are confidential. But I will say what we do see, with the divestiture is really in Wisconsin. We see three different markets. We see the three short lines that CN has put up for sale between Milwaukee and Fond du Lac. Some lines in the Fox Valley out of Green Bay and Appleton, and then what we consider like the Northwoods pulp basket, the east-west from Tony to Goodman and Ashland to Wausau, plus Spencer to Medford, which a lot of people tend to forget about. It's not a traditional, it's not part of the pulp market. They have a handful of small manufacturers, which are often the largest employers in their towns, and in towns like Unity, Colby, Dorchester, Medford. And currently that little line has only 1 day a week service. And this makes it very, very hard. When you combine it with the fact that it's limited 263-pound carloads, makes it very, very hard for those communities to market themselves from an economic development perspective. So not only do we have important pulpwood producers on these lines, but we also have some small manufacturers that we're really hoping that this divestiture process will lead to maybe not an explosion of opportunity for these communities, but some stabilization and some opportunities for growth with a different freight rail service model.
Right, and also some improved infrastructure, like you were mentioning with the Medford line.
Correct. Yep.
So yes, very true. That's why we think this could be a great opportunity. So I think with that, we can open it up with questions or comments from the group, and Rich and I can address them as best we can at this point. I think the next update hopefully will be a lot more exciting because we'll have some real news coming out of CN, hopefully from the RFP process, and then what the next steps would be. So,
if there's no other,
this is Henry. I got a question for Richard. You got any idea what kind of timeline we're looking at here for this RFP process to get done? Because I can tell you pressure is mounting to get more efficient trucks on the road if the rail's not going to get rolling pretty soon. You know, I mean, it's just heading that direction, be more efficient. So just kind of wondering if you have any estimated timeline in your mind that you'd like to see things happen.
Well, I know that they were hoping to be done already. I don't know, Rich might have a more up-to-date process on when there's an expected decision on the RFP process from CN.
Good morning, Henry. Good to hear your voice. So I'm pretty optimistic that they'll have a chosen operator by this summer. Now, how long the actual transaction takes to close, I think is anyone's guess. CN really was optimistic that, you know, when they announced this back in July, that they'd have everything wrapped up between 12 and 18 months. I thought that was a bit optimistic, but I think they'll have a chosen operator definitely by this summer. They've moved very rapidly from more than 20 candidates to fewer than 5. I've heard the number 3 mentioned, but that's, of course, that's not confirmed by CN. I would just say there are fewer than 5 candidates left out of the more than 20 that initially responded to their RFP, and I think that's a very positive sign that they are taking this very seriously, trying to move as quickly as possible.
I do see a question in the chat box, but before that, Secretary Thompson, I noticed you tried to chime in there.
I didn't want to preclude other questions, but I did just want to build on what Lisa and Rich have said, and I think they gave a tremendous presentation. But there's a lot of times I know people in this region of the state feel like economic development initiatives and opportunities tend to seem to go to other parts of the state, and we really, I just want to emphasize that we really view, both for this region of the state and for the forest products industry and others, that this is a big deal. This is definitely a priority for us. And I think we've got some really great talented people, that some of what you just heard from, working on this. But I think this is a real opportunity for this part of the state that doesn't come along, all the time. And so just want to let people know that a lot of it, as Lisa and Rich said, is us trying to have the private sector come in and all of that. But whichever route this goes, this is a significant priority for us, and we're hopeful that a real opportunity both for this part of the state and for the industry. And Henry, I understand your question, as far as timing, and if not, then getting other things moving. But we're hopeful that rail service in this part of the state's been a topic for a long time, like Lisa talked about, and we're hopeful that this can be a real opportunity. I just wanted to add that.
Yep,
Rich, I would have a question. This is Tom Winker from Ozaukee County. Hello again.
Hi, Tom.
Yay. Very simply, as you know, I have a trucking business, a one-man show, and I get into some of these transload facilities that are operating by CN, and I'm not here to trample on CN. I think the state of Wisconsin, our group, whoever, we need to make sure that we improve the service, because it's a trickle-down effect. A guy like me is affected. I'm just a one-man show, but there is a trickle-down effect that ends up going all the way to the actual, the demand, the farmer out there, the dairy farmer that's using these commodities that's coming off of rail. We need to put as much pressure on to make sure that, one, somebody picks up this rail, but two, it's an improved service.
Yes.
And Lisa, thanks for chiming in, but you guys know what I do. And, I get down to the Port of Milwaukee, when trucks are sitting in line, they're just not very efficient. The only way you make money is by having the wheels turn. So we need to work together with not only the railroads out there that are looking to do this, and hopefully we can keep these in-state rails going versus looking out of state and bringing somebody in, because the people that are operating in state know the culture here. So that's kind of my comment, but thanks for listening.
Yeah, that's an excellent comment, Tom. And one of the things that I have been communicating, or the department has been communicating to CN, is, it is their process. They can sell to whoever they want, but we have asked them to be mindful of choosing an operator that is customer focused, that a more of a retail model rather than the class 1 wholesaler type of model that can better serve customers, provide prompt delivery of cars, and improving information to shippers.
Right, and I would just add to that, the other thing that we've made sure to that CN knows is that we want rail service reestablished on the lines that have gone out of service. We don't want it just someone to buy it from them and then try to sell it off and close down those lines. It's very important to us that we do what we can to reestablish and improve rail service across the Northwoods. Because of the economic importance it has to, the northern counties and the whole state. It is, like you said, Tom, a trickle-down effect to everyone. So,
one question that came in from the chat from Mark Rodoris: would the CN divestiture help to drive a Northeast East Wisconsin intermodal facility?
That's a great question for Rich to answer.
My
He
goodness.
covers both.
So I would say that question is going to be studied by the process that's going on with being led by the East Central Wisconsin RPC and New North. And I don't know whether the divestiture would make it more or less likely. The thing about intermodal facilities, they're more determined by the number of containers, container balance, shipping lanes, rather than the identity of the railroad that serves it. But that's a great question. Well, I think we'll know more by the end of this year.
And
go ahead, John.
Oh no, go ahead, Lisa. Yeah, if you want to finish up. There's one more question that came through the chat. So.
Oh nope, I just noticed the other question, so I'll just let you.
Oh, you want to take it? I'll read it off for everyone else. But it says, why would CN sell a profitable line? And if it is not profitable, why would anyone else buy it?
Well, I think like what our 2018 Wisconsin Northwoods Freight Rail Study shows is that with some improved conditions, it is viable and it is can be profitable. I think the big piece, and again, I'm sure Rich can add to this, is that this just doesn't fit into CN's business model. They're a class 1. They're moving freight across the country and into Canada. They're not. What could be profitable is having a regional or short line that is, like Rich said, retail focused. It's focused on the customer, and it can help improve service to the towns like Medford and Wausau and Bradley, and all of those things where there is industry, and it's just a different business model would find it to be more profitable than CN's business model. So I don't know if you have more to add to that, Rich, on that answer.
Sure, yeah. and there two aside from the fact that class ones aren't very good at person-to-person business contacts and trying to, win over business. They aren't very good at serving customers who ship, fewer than 25 carloads per month.
Right.
They are more expensive. Their per hour operating costs are much higher than your typical short line. And three, they tend to price for a return on investment rather than to take business from trucks. That's kind of it's a very crude way of describing how a class one prices their, sets their rates versus, a nimbler, smaller railroad. But what I understand is this pricing to rate on return is the big reason why the rates for pulpwood shippers in the northwoods doubled, tripled, quadrupled in the past 5 years as the old Wisconsin Central contracts expired. So
if I could tag on to both of your guys' comments.
Sure.
Tom again from Ozaukee County. Very simply, here's just an example. Just because this line isn't profitable now doesn't mean it couldn't be profitable with more personalized service. And here's an example. There's a lot of corn gluten product that comes out of Chicago. We could do more by rail, getting it up into Wisconsin, into these various transload facilities. You would take that semi-truck traffic off of the highways from Wisconsin down to Chicago, and it would be more of a local response and better service for the needed customer, the dairy farmer. So I just wanted to add that. I do believe just because it's not profitable now doesn't mean with a little personalized service, it couldn't be vastly profitable. So just my comments.
Right. Nope, that's really good. It's a really good point.
Well, thanks everyone, and thanks for the presentation, Lisa and Rich. Real good discussion. That puts us right where we need to be for our agenda here.
Always like to be on time.
Yeah, thanks. So why don't we take a break? We'll come back after everyone's had their cookies and chips at 10:25, and we'll see everyone then.
Thanks.
A few seconds go by here to allow people to get back into their seats. While we do that, I will introduce Kellyanne Blazik. She is Director of the Office of Rural Prosperity at WDC. And today she's going to be talking to us a little bit about the Rural Prosperity Initiative.
Great. Thank you, Sean. You can advance to the next slide, please. As Sean said, my name is Kellyanne Blazik. I'm the Director of the Office of Rural Prosperity. And here's kind of an overview of what I'll be covering today. So one, just some background on the office. Two, background on the Governor's Blue Ribbon Commission on Rural Prosperity. And then three, we just released a report. And so I'm going to be touching on a few things in the Rural Voices for Prosperity report that came out a month ago. So a little background on me. I started in this position last spring, and I'm from rural Wisconsin. I grew up on my family's farm north of Bangor in La Crosse County. And so I, worked on federal policy and had the opportunity to come back home last year to help start this office. So I'm really excited and really appreciate the opportunity to chat with all of you today. Next slide, please. So just some background on the office. The Office of Rural Prosperity is meant to be a front door to state government for rural stakeholders. So we seek to foster vibrant, prosperous, and resilient rural communities across the state and really provide that one-stop shop to help rural stakeholders navigate programs and resources. So again, the office is housed at WDC, but really I work both internally at WDC, but also across state government, and have had the opportunity to work with a bunch of different state agencies on different projects and really through the commission's work, which I'll talk about later. One of those examples that I wanted to give was a broadband pilot that we ran in conjunction and collaboration with PSC this past fall. You might have seen some news or press releases on that. We identified a gap in not just broadband funding, but also broadband technical assistance. So we partnered with PSC and very quickly stood up this pilot program. I think we gave folks like 3 days notice that we were doing it and received over 90 applications. And from those applications, selected 6 communities to partner with over the course of about 2 to 3 months, really to figure out like what their priorities were on broadband, how we could help them match make with a provider or collect data or find resources, et cetera. So that provides a really nice template going forward to partner with other state agencies in a similar way. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to recognize we are building the Office of Rural Prosperity team. So Danielle Jones recently came on board last week as the Director of Rural Initiatives. She's going to be looking for opportunities to partner with other state agencies and really run those pilots like we did with PSC. Lou Blank is our intern in the office, and then we're actually hiring right now for a Rural Initiatives Manager. So it's really exciting to be able to build the team and really expand our capacity to work on these issues. Next slide, please. So today I wanted to focus on the Commission's work because it's timely and relevant. And so the Commission, a lot of you probably have heard about and participated in the events, but the Governor created the Commission alongside this office last January. So through an executive order, he created the Commission to gather input from stakeholders on current and future challenges, and then to develop a plan and report back to the Governor. So this was envisioned before the pandemic, obviously, so we really had to pivot. We brought on the Aspen Institute as a consultant to really think through how we facilitated conversations, the timeline, how we structured the report, et cetera. And again, I wanted to acknowledge that this was really a state government-wide effort. So WDC really ran point on working with the Governor's office and leading this effort, but we definitely couldn't have done it without partners across state government. WisDOT staff helped out with the listening sessions that we ran. We had folks from DATCAP, Arts Board, et cetera. And so we really appreciated all the support and assistance that we received across state government. When you think about rural prosperity, it's not just economic development, it's quality of life, it's broadband, it's ag, it's really a broad bucket for a lot of different topics that are interconnected. And so through our work with other state agencies, we kind of got to highlight that through the Commission's work. Next slide, please. So the Commission is made up of 12 members that are listed here. As you can see, they represent different industries, different regions, geographic areas of the state. And I'm just so proud of this team and what they were able to accomplish during a pandemic. They've never met each other in person before since they were announced during a pandemic. And so they really were just so passionate and committed to this issue and getting public input despite all the challenges in the fall. So I was really lucky to work with all of them, and they're, again, so committed to continuing this work and seeing real change in their communities. Next slide, please. So there were some key questions that we asked. Oh, do you want to go back one, or? Oh, okay, we're good. Sorry about that. So there were a few opportunities for public engagement. We held 3 virtual conversations with commissioners, which were public listening sessions. And then we also invited written public comments and received 45. And then the commissioners and I joined 25 stakeholder meetings. And collectively, I think there were over 500 kind of engagements with different rural stakeholders that we had the opportunity to interact with. So again, this was really a pivoted effort during a pandemic to get input through virtual means instead of in person. We all would have preferred in person, honestly, I think, in having that town hall setting and being able to see folks face to face, but we definitely did the best that we could during the pandemic. Next slide, please. So there are some key questions we were asking through all of these different public engagement mechanisms. One was just provide some examples of rural prosperity. So we wanted to hear from folks like, in the last 10 years, think of a time when you thought, wow, my rural community is prosperous. Like, what were the pieces that came together to achieve that? 2, think back pre-COVID, so pre-January last year, what were your priorities? And then 3, think to now or in the fall, and what are your priorities during COVID, and have those changed at all? Or are they the same? 4, how local and state government are currently good partners. So, think of a time when a local or state government staffer or a program really helped you. And then 5, how could local and state government be better partners? So where are the gaps, whether that's a staff position, whether that's a program, grant funding, any type of resource, documents, et cetera. So we asked folks to think pretty broadly about that. Next slide, please. So out of all of this, we put together a report called Rural Voices for Prosperity and released that a month ago in December 2020. And just on the structure of the report, at the beginning, there's 10 cross-cutting recommendations, and those are the recommendations from the commissioners. So these are pretty high level. It's about like state government and logistically, how do you support and really advance and prioritize rural prosperity? And then the bulk of the report is actually the findings section. And the findings section is not necessarily recommendations from the commissioners. It's really a reflection and an account of what the commissioners heard from rural stakeholders and ideas that require additional exploration. So again, the findings section, that's really not editorialized. We spent a lot of time with the Aspen Institute transcribing all of the public listening session breakouts, taking notes during the meetings that we took, and then organizing that incredible amount of information into tables that were thematic based on industries or sectors or concepts, and then translating that into this report. So we really prioritized making sure that if you reached out to the commission or participated in one of the listening sessions, that all of that information and data and voice and all those voices are reflected in this report. So we're really proud of, again, what we were able to accomplish during the pandemic. And if you go to the next slide, please. I just wanted to pull out one of the commissioner recommendations. Again, there's 10 of them. Some of them are more like logistically at the state government level. How do you prioritize this, and what's the role of the Office of Rural Prosperity? And this is one of them, which is invest in vital ingredients for a better future. But I think it gets at, one of the themes coming out of the commission is really how interconnected all these issues are. So, for some people, they're like, we've got to fix childcare. Other people said, we got to find new markets for agriculture. Other people said, we really want to focus on leadership. And so depending on the community and what sector you're a part of, your priorities were a little different, and that's okay. But I think the commissioners through this report really wanted to showcase how you can't just prioritize one thing, right? Because the minute you pull on one thread, you pull on 50 other threads. So broadband, of course, came up in every conversation we had in every context, whether that was workforce development, healthcare, education, et cetera. But I think folks really wanted to make sure that again, we're thinking about this holistically, and that we don't prioritize one thing at the expense of other things. So I just wanted to highlight that. And again, I feel like one of the themes coming out of this was really a community specific effort. So if you look at Sparta, there's going to be different priorities than Bayfield, and that's okay. And depending on the community's assets and their priorities and their goals, rural prosperity is going to look a little different from community to community. Next slide, please. So in terms of, again, the structure, there's the 10 recommendations at the beginning, and then there's a finding section, and the finding section is divided into 5 subcategories. So one is how rural Wisconsin is organizing to make progress. How well are people connecting? How are people doing? How's business and the economy doing? And how's our rural place doing? So I just wanted to, again, this is like a 97-page report, so I wanted to highlight a few things that may be relevant or interesting to folks on this call, but I really encourage you to read the report and share it with your colleagues, and we welcome feedback, or if you think, geez, you really missed this, like, please reach out. But if you go to the next slide, I'll just highlight a few things that we found. So in the findings section, folks wanted to recognize that there is no one rule. So again, it's very community specific. There's no one size fits all approach. One community may want to focus on outdoor recreation. Another community's economy may be based on forestry. So the priorities for each of those communities may look differently. 2, stakeholders welcome state investment in outdoor recreation and applaud WisDOT for its support of roads and bridges projects. There was a very clear interest in outdoor recreation as a bright spot in the rural economy, both during COVID, but also before. A lot of people brought up the unprecedented interest in going to state parks and recreating outdoors, whether that's utilizing, kayak outfitters or rock climbing outfitters or whatnot. And so I think people definitely connected outdoor recreation to support from WisDOT in making sure that people can access some of those outdoor recreation opportunities. 3, forestry, wood products, and paper remain a core industry for rural Wisconsin and the entire state. We heard earlier on this call some of the challenges that the forestry industry is tackling right now, but I think a lot of folks up north wanted to recognize that the industry is pivoting and changing, and there's new opportunities to take advantage of. And then 4, farmers face challenges moving their products to market during COVID due to transportation, processing, and distribution issues. So supply chain definitely came up quite a bit in the ag context. A lot of people spoke about, meat processing and kind of the bottlenecks there during COVID, and, sick workers at meat processing plants kind of forcing a shutdown, and then, local meat processing plants not being able to pick up that capacity. And so there was a really interest in workforce development in the meat processing context, and also expansion of existing plants. Next slide, please. And then I just wanted to highlight some ideas to explore. And again, this is a very large report. This is kind of a drop in the bucket, but there was an interest in strengthening leadership training to build capacity across rural Wisconsin. And I'll also just say that there was specifically an interest in rural youth leadership training. And one of the members of the commission is a high school senior, and I think her voice has been really important because that's really why we're doing all of this, is to make sure that rural communities are prosperous and are an opportunity for the next generation. Second, elevate and share success stories from rural communities. One of the fun parts about the public listening sessions is that we randomly broke participants up into small groups virtually to have conversations facilitated by the commissioners. And that was an opportunity, again, randomly to divide folks up so that they could share stories and interact with folks that maybe they wouldn't have. So folks from different geographic areas, folks from different sectors. And a lot of folks told us, we appreciated that opportunity, and we learned something from the forestry industry, or we learned something from the ag industry that we wouldn't have otherwise. So thinking about ways to kind of elevate success stories so that as folks are trying to tackle some of the similar issues, they don't have to recreate the wheel. 3, incorporate rural participation in state policy and program design. Again, there was a real interest in making sure that as programs are being created or altered, that rural voices are incorporated, and folks know that, have a better understanding of what the impact would be in rural communities. a lot of folks, gave examples of state programs that may not work well in rural communities right now for various eligibility or requirement reasons. And again, thought that participation and engagement with rural communities was a key way to make sure that that doesn't happen in the future, or those kind of issues with accessing state programs can be rectified. 4, solicit input from the private sector on transportation needs. This is a great group that's already tackling that. And so some of the things that are identified in this report, again, it's almost like an opportunity to showcase some things that are already happening that maybe people don't know about. And then invest in gaps that inhibit agricultural market development. Again, this goes back to the supply chain issues during COVID and folks wanting to kind of identify ways to bridge those gaps and make sure that there's support for new market development when there's opportunities. And then lastly, implement multimodal transportation projects to help connect Wisconsinites to outdoor recreation opportunities. Again, there was a real interest in outdoor recreation as kind of this bright spot in the rural economy, and folks really wanted to think about how do we capitalize that and really advance those opportunities and make sure nothing is stifling them. So especially during the pandemic, when folks are getting outside, how do we make sure that if somebody wants to start a new business or be an entrepreneur in the outdoor recreation space, how do we make sure that they're supported? But then also, again, how do we make sure that our state parks and different outdoor recreation opportunities, there's a way for people to get there. And then I think there's one more slide here. I want to go to the next slide. Yep, thank you. So again, that's a drop in the bucket. I encourage you all to read the report. Next steps, the commissioners are really looking forward to continuing their work. So they're all doers and they're very action oriented. And so we welcome feedback on the report. We welcome ideas on what was left out or not incorporated. We welcome thoughts on what we should prioritize tackling first, et cetera. And we're looking for opportunities for collaboration, pilots, or other ways to work together. So again, I mentioned Danielle Jones came on the ORP team. She's going to be using this report as kind of a foundation to identify ways to work together with other state agencies to run pilots using the template of the broadband pilot with PSD. So if you think of a way, to work together, or a pilot idea or something that really resonated with you in this report, please feel free to reach out to me. And if you go to the last slide, I think my contact information is here. And I welcome any phone calls or emails with any thoughts or ideas. So thank you again. I really appreciate the time and opportunity to speak with you all.
Well, thank you, Kellyanne. And yeah, it was really, really interesting report that was put out. So great work that you guys and your office are doing. Are there any questions that anyone has for Kellyanne?
Yeah, this is Henry. I have a question for Kellyanne. So did the commission discuss how it would facilitate, or if it could facilitate, the influx of people moving to the north with current industry and current way of life? So for instance, the first thing that I see happening is people are moving to the north. We're going to have to do a lot of training on why forests are managed the way they are. And, there's concern to keep forest as forest, obviously, because that really is how we get recreational opportunities that we have in this state. So just wondering if the commission is that far yet in their discussions, because there's going to have to be a learning curve there. As they see people moving to the north, first thing they want to do is, well, we don't want any trucks coming down our road and that type of thing. And that really is an impact on most of GLTPA's members' way of life that they've for generations. So not that's a bad thing. It's just a concern that we're wondering if the commission is looking at or is going to address.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I appreciate you bringing that up. And that definitely did come up in the commission's listening sessions in different ways in terms of, the interest in moving to rural communities during the pandemic. One, in terms of like industry, like you mentioned, but also folks, already brought up being priced out of their own communities in terms of housing and, thinking about how much housing prices have been driven up by the influx just in the last few months. A lot of folks talked about, I was thinking about buying, but now I'm seeing things go up however much percent. And I'm rethinking that, or I'm thinking maybe I'll have to leave my community because it's getting too expensive for me to live here. So I think that's definitely of concern and something that the commissioners are interested in. And like you mentioned, some of this is education and just understanding different industries that people may not be aware of and why folks are doing certain things. So if you have ideas or if there's opportunities to work together, we're definitely interested. We've been working with the Council on Forestry, and I know that they are really keen on, highlighting how much forestry provides to the state's economy and how integral it is. And again, just doing some of the education so folks understand like how it impacts them in their daily life. So again, if you have specific ideas, I'm happy to chat and explore that more.
Well, thanks again, Kellyanne. And
Thank you.
Yeah, for the sake of time, why don't we move on? But thanks again. We really appreciate the presentation.
Thanks, Sean.
Sean, this is Joe Nestler. I'd like to just give a shout out. I've noticed that Randy Romansky, the Secretary of the Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection, has been with us all morning, and it's really impressive that he's been able to take time out of his busy schedule to stay current with our freight issues. So. Randy, if you're still with us, I'd like to acknowledge that and thank you very much.
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate that. I see a lot of familiar names and faces on this call, so it's good to see all of you. Secretary Thompson and I often talk about the interconnected nature, obviously, of agriculture and transportation, and I see that interwoven throughout today's presentation. So. We appreciate being part of this. We appreciate the opportunity to connect some dots with you, and we want everybody on this meeting today to know that we're all partners in this and willing to do the best we can to invest in our resources and our economy. So, Joe, thanks for the quick shout out and the opportunity. I'm going to turn the camera off and continue to listen and learn.
Thank you.
With that, I'll turn things over to Dean Prestegard, who's going to lead our panel discussion today on the impacts COVID-19 has had on freight mobility in our state.
Great. Thanks, Sean. And thanks, everyone, for joining us today. I know it's been a long time since we had one of these meetings, so it's good to at least virtually see everyone participating. So with this panel, we have a great panel of experts here to discuss the impacts that COVID-19 has had on their industries and customers. But before I introduce the panel, I just want to mention a couple of housekeeping items. Again, first off, there's the white paper that we did provide. The intent of that white paper is really to provide some of the background and the more general information about COVID-19 and its impacts, so that we can hear from the panelists specifically on what they're seeing impacting their industry and their customers. And second, after I introduce the panelists, each of them will make their presentations, and we'll be holding all questions until after each panelist has had that opportunity. But if you have a question during the presentations, please feel free to send them to Sean using the chat box, and then we'll try to get to each and every question once we hit that wrap-up session there. So with that, let me go ahead and introduce each of the panelists in the order that they'll be speaking. First, we have Steve Rose. Steve is the Director of Strategic Sales at Redwood Logistics. Jim Best, he's an experienced air cargo executive and the former owner of Pilot Air Freight. Mark Osterly, Division Administrator for the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. And Sandy Siegel, the president managing partner of M.E. Day and Company. So with that, I will go ahead and I will turn it over to Steve.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the time today, and I've learned a lot so far in what we've listened to so far. Appreciate everybody's input. I'm here, I'm based here in Milwaukee, and I work for an organization called Red Road Logistics out of Chicago. And we are primarily a 3PL. We own several different platforms. One in trucking. We own a trucking company, about 350 trucks, as well as some warehousing. And our thing that I work in a lot is the technology side of the business. I'm in strategic sales. So with that, I want to talk a little bit about what happened in 2020 and kind of how it started and how it ended up for our organization and what we saw here in the state. I primarily spend the majority of my time working here in the state of Wisconsin with clients, and we had a very interesting year. And one of the things that we had was when COVID hit, there was a big shutdown. A lot of people were struggling, trying to get product out and everything else. And then when things kind of opened back up in the summer, it was a hard time by then getting people back to work. And then the trucking market went kind of haywire, went upside down a little bit. Capacity wasn't there. Rates really went up, and we've seen a lot of shippers and companies like that having a hard time to do that. So what our company did to respond to that is we jumped into our technology side, and we have some proprietary middleware that connects about anything to anything. So we could connect ERP operating systems into WMS, TMS systems. And so we also developed what we call digital freight matching. So basically what that does is that it is tied into our proprietary TMS that we have. And we work with a lot of platforms out there called DAT and truck stops and other type places that people are posting for loads, whether it be shippers or trucking companies or brokers and stuff. So what we did, we tied into that along with a lot of private fleets. For an example, in this state here, we have some pretty large private fleets. Kohler has one, Harley Davidson, Ashley, to name a couple. So as they're moving their product out, they're trying to get their trucks back to the right position. So they tie into this too. So with that, we developed that, and we connected into people's systems, or they could do an API call out into us, and we could respond back to them within virtually of just a very few seconds to show them what the current rate was, what the capacity was, and then if they wanted to, they could book right through that system, and it would tender the load out to that particular asset that they was looking for. And so that we really kicked that into high gear, and that really helped a lot. And then we also started working with trucking companies and shippers to try to allocate carriers into some of the deficit market. In my experience here, I've been here since 1996 in the Wisconsin market, and it's always been primarily an outbound state. So we've had always a tough time getting capacity into the state. And so with the market being the way that it has been in 2020, we had to work a little bit more with carriers and also backhaul fleets and trucking companies and shippers to try to get capacity back into the Wisconsin market. So we did all that, like I said, through our technology platform. If you could go to the next slide, Sean. One more, I apologize. So this is kind of how we did. I just talked a little bit about our digital freight matching, and then we allocated carriers to deficit regions, and I'm just mainly talking about Wisconsin here. And then we offered a lot of people. One of the things we offer is a managed transportation services. So with people working remotely and everything else, it took a while for people to get there. So what we can do is come in and actually help companies, help them manage their whole long supply chain and their logistics to our managed transportation solutions. We did that for a couple of organizations here last year to help them facilitate being that logistics department that they had. And so A lot of companies look towards technology for that. So TMS, which stands for Transportation Management Solutions, we represent a couple of the platforms, a company called OTM or Oracle, and also for Mercury Gate, a couple of robust platforms. So we kind of work with them, with companies that want to implement that and get that going. So we have a couple of rapid things. So we're able to get several of those implemented throughout the community and in the shipping community in the state here in 2020. And then we also could do with that, we showed a lot of people the return on investment that utilizing technology. And just goes to show you that in 2020, our company, it ended up here like in the third and the fourth quarters that we had a banner year. So we had like our company's been in business for about since like 1999. We had our best year ever. And it was mainly through stepping up through technology and helping clients. And so we had a great year. So I'll get into what we're looking for and what we're seeing so far in 2021 and everything else there, Sean, if you can go to the next slide. So with that, we're going to continue to, we've actually, our digital freight brokerage, we've actually working with more and more companies with that, that we've talked to, whether it be smaller shippers or other type people that are buying and looking for transportation. We're expanding that out where we can actually tie into them through an API call out so they can tap into the market. And a lot of people are spending a lot of time trying to find capacity, trying to get information on where loads are and where shipments are, and then the cost. How do you, like one time it's this much money, the next time it's a lot more money. So how do you control that? How do you forecast that? So through this technology, we are it's working really well for a lot of companies. We're expanding upon that in this year. So we have also some of the industry that we work with here in the state is the automotive industry, and they took a pretty hard hit in the beginning of the COVID pandemic, and now that industry is starting to jump back. I don't know if you've been to car lots, but the inventory is down, but it's starting to rebound. Cost of cars have really went up over the last several months, and so we have been working very strongly with that industry and suppliers in the area. That we don't have any manufacturers anymore in the state. We have a lot of companies that are tier 1, tier 2 suppliers in the state. And so we have worked a lot with them to develop some technology. We also have worked with them, a lot of companies, due to the fact of the capacity being tied into cost. So we have done some regional stuff where looking to maybe helping them open some forward warehousing and do some optimization studies on where's the best place for them to put maybe a forward DC or a pooling situation, working with some LTL type carriers in the area. One of the companies we partner with and work a lot with here in the state is in an M-Tax there. They provide a real regional footprint here in the state, so they can do a lot of distribution work. So we've worked a lot with them to bring in product where they can do the distribution. So we're hoping to have a good 2021. So far, like I said, we're really busy, and we've done a lot of hiring ourselves in our area, mainly through the technology side, and working with companies as hopefully I'm ready to come out of the bunker. So hopefully as the pandemic kind of hopefully subsides and we get back to some normalcy, we'll be able to come out and start making some of these relationship calls and some of the stuff in person. So that's really I have. I'll wait to answer your questions a little bit later. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Steve. And then Jim Best, if you would like to present your information.
Sure. Thank you. I'd like to present just a brief snapshot and overview of the air cargo industry globally and how it affects Wisconsin. And just to add something to what Steve said, is that clearly technology is what's happening in all modes of transportation, trying to find ways to be productive, efficient, moving forward. But as I will state in my presentation, private equity today has a lot of money to invest in logistics and transportation companies. And it's going to take place quite a bit in 21, a lot more than 22. So get ready, because there's going to be a lot of consolidation taking place. Having said that, I just wanted to share that I've been in air cargo since 1987. So I've seen a lot of evolution, changes, peaks and valleys, etc. Last year was the second most volatile year I've ever seen. The only exception was after 9/11, which hopefully our country and our world will never experience again. There's many uncontrollable factors today that are affecting the air cargo industry, and it looks significantly different today than it did a year ago. Here's a couple of my observations that took place because of the pandemic and the marketplace and what the industry is facing today, both globally and here in Wisconsin. Global and U.S. air cargo capacity is down over 30% from a year ago. And by that, I mean the ability to fly air cargo throughout the world. This is mostly due to the commercial airlines reducing the number of flights, primarily internationally. Initially, it was done to avoid passenger contamination, people's reluctance to fly. But the impact it had on global cargo is that a lot of wide bodies that fly international, the airlines, it's all profit when you can put cargo in the bellies of those airplanes. So this resulted in less combination aircraft flying, which means passenger no cargo. If you take a Delta 767 from Atlanta to Amsterdam, upper deck is passenger, lower deck is cargo. And again, it dictates the price based on the capacity of the airline. Many airlines and air freight companies started to change their pricing, and it became market pricing of the day. And to a smaller degree, this took place in the United States as well, since there were fewer aircraft flying. Cargo aircraft carriers, for the most part, have raised their pricing and added surcharges unprecedented in the transportation industry across all modes of transportation. There's another factor that evolved this year that is extremely unique, and that was, this is really truly the first time that the major carriers put in shipper quotas. The logic behind this was there was such an increase in e-commerce shipments that were primarily pandemic related since March, and there was only so much capacity. The express carriers and the airlines saw this as an opportunity to raise pricing and give major customers of theirs quotas. Some of the largest manufacturers in Wisconsin who ship domestic had their quotas tied to last year's fourth quarter shipment count. We had a number of major clients come to us and ask if they could dovetail on our pricing with the express carriers, because one spend was over $20 million a year and they couldn't get more space from one of the express carriers. Building on that, the virus and pandemic, when it comes to surcharges, highlighted serious gaps in global supply chains, and rates being assessed in this business I've never seen before, and this includes surcharges. Every year, and I'm sure Steve will attest to this, every carrier this year, whether it's LTL, truckload, ocean, I know Sandy, I think, is on this call, and air carriers came up with creative surcharges in 2020. And the key thing for manufacturers, shippers, distribution companies to be cognizant of in the industry, what happens is when surcharges start to take place, carriers build that into the pricing, and then fourth quarter of 2021, you get ready to see surcharges again based on some of the same criteria we saw this past December. How virus and pandemic affected U.S. companies? The major area I would say, and whether it was air cargo, even intermodal or ocean, was the service suffered. Aside from the price increases that everybody experienced last year, the service went down. One of the express carriers in December, a major one, their on-time performance was 65%. And what they tell their customers including large customers, is that there's only so much capacity, we can only move so much freight. So a few choices for both heavyweight and small package products to move, and the rates increased. And this major issue comes into play with the lack of preparation for the major shift in both the global capacity and domestic operations. For example, here home in Milwaukee, for example, the largest airline flying out of Milwaukee, number of flights and capacity was Southwest. And last year, they reduced the number of flights out of Milwaukee by 40%, and which means it reduces the ability to move cargo in the belly of the aircraft by 40% as well. Additionally, what all the airlines have done here in the United States is they've cut back hours quite a bit. Next topic is trends in cargo and industry consolidation. This, to me, is quite alarming because there's a global trend taking place where the top 10 air freight and global companies are buying competitors and thereby limiting choices. For example, Giant XPO just announced in the last month, just purchased the UK and Ireland logistics operation from Kuehne+Nagel. That's significant. A year and a half ago, CEVA, a giant European organization, bought another company called Panalpina. These were billion-dollar acquisitions and mergers, and there's more to come this year as private equity firms are looking to expand their portfolio and buy the transportation companies that are available. It's very important and prudent for Wisconsin distributors, manufacturers, importers, and exporters to not single source when it comes to transportation. It's not prudent to do that today. There's a lot of the big carriers that want to do what's called where they put all their they pool all their products, they bundle, and they give you a great rate, for example, on a small package, but your heavyweight air or your global, the pricing isn't competitive, but because you need them for express shipments, they actually have the hook that gets you to commit to bundling their products with one company. And lastly, I think today for the impact of Wisconsin shippers is what's critical is that there still are flights operating globally, fewer flights operating globally here in the United States, as well as throughout the world. I don't expect the situation to change much before the third quarter if the pandemic subsides. Wisconsin companies need to develop strategic relationships with their carriers for all modes. Aside from air cargo, there's been a lot of consolidation in truckload ocean, and probably as mentioned earlier today, the biggest problem facing our industry today is shortage of drivers because it drives up the cost of every mode of transportation. And that's where we can use the Wisconsin DOT and the governor and the secretary of transportation to be very inclusive when it comes to hours of operation, changes in weights, tolls, et cetera, because all those things add to the cost of moving goods into and out of Wisconsin. Again, I see these as challenges, and they can't be overcome because we've overcome many challenges in the past, and think that if companies invest in their carrier relationships and benchmark, we can get through a good 2021. That's what I have, Dean.
Great. Thank you, Jim. I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions here shortly for you. And now I'll turn it over to Mark for your presentation.
Great, Dean.
I'm sorry, Mark. You're breaking up. Hard to hear.
Okay, is that better?
Much better.
That's better?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. All right. Well, on the screen there, you see the 4 areas I'm going to cover here over the next couple of minutes. The emergency declaration, hours of service changes, drug and alcohol clearinghouse, which Jason brought up. So I'm going to give kind of a 3,000 high level discussion on drug and alcohol clearinghouse, and then also cover what we're doing on off-site investigations. Next screen, please. So impact on COVID-19. Of course, we've heard a lot today about that. One thing on our area, we had from Federal Motor Carrier, there was a lot of emergency declarations that went out. I have on the screen the screenshot, and that's currently, we still have the emergency declaration through February 28th of 2021. So that emergency declaration recently added vaccines to that declaration, but it started back in March and included medical supplies, equipment, supplies to grocery stores, livestock and feed. It included fuel hauling. So there was a lot going on. And during that process of that emergency declaration, there was also CDL components and other components within the industry to help the trucking industry. With that, what I would like to shout out is through the partnerships, within WisDOT, with Wisconsin State Patrol, with the CDL division, Motor Carrier Services, and then on the outside, Wisconsin Motor Carrier Association, we had great communication from March to today. So NEO's staff did a great job communicating. We actually had some Zoom meetings like this with the industry, but we were continually trying to get the information out to the trucking industry on these exemptions and declarations from interstate and intrastate freight during these trying times. So what I would say to you is, next screen, please. You'll see on there that it has all declarations. So if you're questioning something, and we've had trucking companies that were stopped on the roadside, and we did training to all the State Patrol across the country, all DOTs across the country. But things do happen on a roadside inspection where an inspector may cite the motor carrier, and maybe the motor carrier doesn't even know they're exempt or they're hauling exempt freight. So that does happen, or the driver doesn't understand it. So we do a data queue process after the fact. If you have those questions going in the past 9-10 months that you're questioning a roadside inspection, I more than welcome you to do a data queue saying, hey, we were hauling this exempt commodity. We should have been cited for this violation. So I do recommend to the industry to look at the inspections that occurred around the country, and possibly you were exempt at that time. Next screen, please. So there, again, that's the continuation of that screen. If you see there, it's fmcsa.dot.gov/COVID-19. So if you go to that site, you can see everything if you're, exempt or not. Again, that was modified during times. There were CDL, drug and alcohol testing requirements, driver, as you see on there, driver's medical cards. So there were different things exempted and accepted. Some states, our state was pretty good from the CDL division, but some CDL divisions around the country were having issues or entirely shut down, that weren't allowing, weren't having any CDL license or any licensing process. So there's a lot of variation depending if you have drivers in other places around the country. There were different state and federal requirements that were happening. But again, that's the website if you're looking for the past exemptions. Next screen, please. So through all this, there was a major hours of service change. Next screen, please. So June of 2020, major change which impacted the industry. Those 4 changes you see on your screen there: short haul exception, adverse driving conditions, 30-minute break, and the special the sleeper berth provisions. So just to give you a high level on that, the short haul basically increased. We had a 100 air mile exemption. Now it's a 150 mile exemption, and then added 2 hours to that. So if you were a local carrier hauling within 150 miles, you did not have to run an electronic logging device, or a logbook. You can just run on a time card or a timesheet of that sort. The 30-minute break exemption, basically that modified that 30-minute break that you could take it on duty, off duty, or sleeper berth. Adverse driving conditions, pretty much, I won't get into that too deep, but it is what it says, just added 2 hours to the adverse driving conditions and kind of modified that definition a little bit for different situations that come up. And then the sleeper berth provision was a major change. So that added a component that a driver can split their sleeper berth in 2 and 8 or 3 and 7 to get their 10 hours off. But the periods don't count to their 14 hours duty. So that was a major change within the industry that occurred right during the pandemic. So we had information flowing out to the industry there. And it affects different types of groups, and depending what you're hauling, depending where you're going, depending on how you're operating, these things impacted you. Some companies it didn't impact at all. Next screen, please. Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse, next screen, please. So as Jason brought up, this was a major change that began in January of 2020. So just give you a little background on what's going on here is the drug and alcohol testing rules for CDL drivers did not change. So there was always pre-employment, random requirements, post-accident requirements. So the actual rule didn't change. The issue that this rule has had over the years is that drivers would test positive at company A. You know, company A would do a random test and that driver would test positive. And then that driver would go to company B and would not identify company A on their application. Let's say there was a lag of 2 months or whatever. They would show company Z on the application that they worked for, but they had a valid CDL. They'd go in and get a pre-employment. So that pre-employment or random positive that they had at company A would not trace to them. And the company B had no idea of that test, okay? The regulatory side, when we do the investigation, it was very hard to track that down. We would see that positive, but we'd see the positive and we'd see the carrier either terminated that driver, the driver left, and we'd be very hard for us to track that. So the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse, which was actually a recommendation from American Trucking Association, that our regulations saying we need to track these drivers on a positive test. What does that mean? It's the same regulatory process, but they do have to have an account. The motor carrier has to have an account. And that's been the issue is our web-based process of the clearinghouse. Everybody was told in 2019 to get accounts, but of course everybody waited to January of 2020 and it really lagged it down. Now we're in the query process. There's an annual query, which they could have did their queries at any point, but everybody waited till like January 1st of 2021. And our systems bogged down here again over the last 2 weeks. So of course, it's just how everybody works. And we're talking nationwide here. We're talking, you know, CDL drivers and trucking companies and bus companies all across the country were affected of this clearinghouse. And this clearinghouse is a web-based product that FMCSA runs. So it is a huge process. But it is that driver that, just to give you a high level on that driver that does test positive, they have to go to a substance abuse professional. Once they get that evaluation, then they can do a return to duty test and come back into the industry. Okay, and that's the that's the process. If I was with company A and I decided to leave that company, but I had a positive and I was with the substance abuse professional, I go to company B. Company B will now see that I don't know if I got lost here. Company will now see that I do have that positive and that I must follow up and finish my evaluation and do my return to duty before I start driving a commercial motor vehicle requiring a CDL again. So it's kind of high level on drug and alcohol there, but definitely a major two rules that affected the industry here during the pandemic time. Next screen, please. So there is more information on those three areas. Again, the hours of service, the clearinghouse, and the exemptions. One thing I do not have a screen on is off-site audits or investigations. With the in conjunction with the State Patrol and nationwide, back in 2019, ironically, we did training, FMCSA did training all across the country on off-site auditing, off-site investigation. If we can do a post-crash or any investigation off-site. So how this training occurred, we created a process and we were going to use it 20% of the time because of where we were going. But then the pandemic hit, and starting in March and April, we flipped. And to this day, all the federal investigators are still not going out to the motor carriers. Federal investigators are doing off-site audits. How does that affect the industry? Well, one thing, the off-site process, of course, we have the web process. It's they can scan and upload all the documents they're dealing with the investigator off-site, either via phone or they have Zoom meetings with the motor carrier. But what I would say to that motor carrier is we get jammed up times, the investigators getting jammed up that the motor carriers aren't forwarding them the information timely, so it gets difficult. But I do say it is a benefit to the industry is we are not allowed to do a rating. So there's a rating process of a satisfactory, conditional, or unsatisfactory. We have to be on site. So it's actually a benefit to the motor carrier. We just do a non-rated review and look at those areas that we that have been identified either through a crash or roadside inspection. But we do not rate that carrier. So the rating has definitely been affected, and companies, if they get a lower rating, it definitely affects them, and different shippers look at that rating. But now from our offsite process, there is no rating. So there is a change there, a benefit, because we can't rate them because we're not on site. So it kind of gives you a background, high level background. Next screen, please. If you have any questions, after today or whatever, there's my email. And if you have exemption questions, hours of service, drug and alcohol, or anything on auditing process, more than welcome that. Again, this is the, on the federal motor carrier was, dealing with the emergency declaration in the interstate or across the country, and then Wisconsin. So if you have questions there, I can get you to a person from Wisconsin State Patrol or the CDL division to help you guys out. So again, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Great. Thank you, Mark. And now we'll turn it over to Sandy. Go ahead, Sandy.
Great. Thanks, Dean. So perhaps for anyone that may not know Emmy Day or be familiar with us, we are a customs broker and freight forwarder, been around for over 100 years. I would mimic what Jim said. In my career of nearly 40 years, I've never seen anything quite like this. So was really quite an interesting year for sure. As a broker and a forwarder, of course, our customers are importers and U.S. shippers, and can talk about how they were impacted and we were impacted in providing those services. I certainly will mimic a lot of what you've already heard today, but perhaps in the spirit of misery likes company, I can share some of the anecdotes that we experienced and how we handle that working with our clients. So if we can move on to the next slide. I want to set the stage a little bit, and Larry did this as well, talking about the hardwood industry and how they were hit with retaliatory duties on U.S. exports. And I think that's just important to think about when we talk about the economic impact that COVID had and the supply chain disruptions, that we were already in a disrupted trade environment for a lot of industries because of the, various trade wars that led up to, 2020, and particular, the China duties, which we've all heard, quite a bit about, and all the added cost and disruption in that regard. And then the 232 duties on steel and aluminum. And that was on again, off again for some of our larger trading partners like Canada. And because of those 232 duties and some of our other, Airbus and other trade issues, there was a lot of retaliation around the world that, again, affected our U.S. exports. So again, leading into the pandemic and that disruption, we were already seeing some normal trade relations changing, some pricing changing, and some of the normal supply and demand cycles being disrupted. Next slide, please. So, and now we enter the COVID world, and how that impacted trade and transportation in particular. So, from our perspective, it was a little bit like watching a tsunami unfold. Started right after Chinese New Year, of course, last year, and China being impacted by COVID, and then, from country to country, how we saw, manufacturing shut down and, industry shut down and go on lockdown and so forth. And then, of course, as it impacted the U.S. eventually. So a lot of, there's a lot of statistics which are great in the white paper. I encourage you to read that. Pretty staggering in how, the numbers were impacted in that regard. The carriers, in particular, really took control of the supply and demand and trying to stabilize their pricing. And, if I was going to summarize the impact in general on transportation, it would be unpredictability and, instability, and trying to move cargo, ocean cargo, to this point, and I'll talk about how it's changed, but is still so unpredictable, since the beginning of the pandemic. So as the volumes started to drop significantly when China was shut down and factories were shut down because of the pandemic, obviously, the demand went down, and so what cargo was available to move was a challenge because the carriers kept taking vessels out of rotation, and often at the last minute. So, very, very unpredictable for us as a forwarder, for customers trying to plan. Gave a number there of how 80 vessels just in a 2-month period were pulled out of rotation. Sometimes at the last minute, the vessel would sail, but then they would, take certain ports out of the rotation. So again, from a planning predictability, it was a challenge. And sometimes you spent, weeks or longer trying to secure a booking, moving out of Asia or various other ports. Again, as the pandemic moved around the world, different ports shut down. Rotterdam hit its lowest, one of the biggest ports of the world, hit its lowest volume and of activity. And it was disrupting the normal rhythm of cargo and how carriers try to, plan U.S. imports coming in and then turning around the vessels with the exports and, repositioning the empties. And that whole disruption of the normal rhythms affected the availability of equipment, chassis and empty containers. Refrigerated containers in particular were very difficult to secure through most of 2020 because carriers were having to, ship empty containers to get them at the right ports to, again, react to the disruption in normal freight cycles and so forth. So, of course, all of those challenges added to pricing. You'd have to, pay extra just to sometimes have a trucker pick up an empty several ports away to get it to you to be able to ship a U.S. export. again, delays in getting that equipment and so forth. So, all of which, again, added to the unpredictability and, some of the challenges of moving that cargo, whether it be import or export. The freight and the equipment shortages was particularly an issue here in the Midwest because more of the volumes of empties and equipment was positioned, on the U.S. East or West Coast. So again, trying to reposition that was often an additional delay or an extra expense for those of us in the Midwest. Jim certainly touched on air freight, which I would certainly validate. The space was, the less capacity, so it was very difficult, securing space. And what, was the first time in my career, you could get space and get a rate, but it wasn't confirmed till you actually had the freight on board because the pricing was so extremely volatile and changing from day to day. So again, making it a little bit difficult for all of us trying to plan the expenses and so forth. Next slide, please. So again, talking about all of these, impacts and disruptions on supply chains, we saw things start to improve, in third quarter and certainly into fourth quarter. But, there's still factories that were shut down or even today short-staffed, dealing with sanitation issues and still dealing with health issues and so forth. At the worst, position through COVID, what was also frustrating in pricing was that even if you had contract pricing in place with an ocean carrier, they would satisfy the minimum, but the contract rates were pretty low because they were negotiated in April. Contract seasons, begin in May for ocean cargo. So when they were negotiated in April last year, they were fairly low because volumes were down. As volume picked up third and fourth quarter this year, they'd much rather book something with a spot rate because that spot rate is sometimes 2 or 3 times higher than the negotiated contract rate. So it's really hard to get that secured space and ocean booking under your contract cargo. Importers are paying extraordinary premiums. I have never seen anything like it in my career. Some of those numbers, I believe, are in that white paper. Not only are the spot rates higher, but there is a very new and creative premium, as Jim alluded to as well. We're paying up to another $2,500, $3,000 per container to book cargo, to get guaranteed space and equipment. So it's every man for himself in trying to book cargo now as the volumes have picked up. The real challenges which continue that were throughout 2020 are reduced staff and challenges and backup at the ports and the terminals, the rail terminals, and the various ocean ports, longer waiting time. We all talked about that with the truckers, and obviously not productive time for the truckers if they're waiting in line. Added measures in, temperature taking and protocols put in place with COVID, both at the terminals and ports and a lot of times at the consignees or the shippers. A lot of additional steps as far as safety measures and so forth, in loading a trucker and whatnot that also added to their time. What's been significant and yet another cost to importers and suppliers has been detention fees at the ports and terminals that is passed on fairly or not fairly, but because of the drivers waiting or the freight not loading timely and so forth. So yet another thing going to the bottom line. Throughout this process, customs as well as the other government agencies like Food and Drug and Agriculture and so forth Many of them, the ones that could, went to remote status as well. They still obviously have people in the field, but definitely a reduced staff there by choice, as well as by dealing with how the pandemic and illness has affected them. They've been more flexible in regards to some of the customs processes and documentation processes for agriculture. Circumstances where original documents were previously required, they were accepting electronic scans and so forth. So that helped, facilitate the clearance of the cargo. But at the same time, a reduced staff, harder to get a hold of some people, working remote, or because they're all spread out. Often with our government agencies, it's difficult to know, which party to speak to and to get a hold of someone. So they're, again, cooperative and trying to help facilitate the movement and release of cargo, but sometimes a little bit more challenging in that regard. Next slide, please. So, I think somebody else too said, we've got a little bit of good news and bad news. We certainly, as I said, saw business pick up and volumes pick up in the third quarter, substantially in the fourth quarter. But I think that's an indication of several things. Certainly, economists would tell you there's some recovery, but we're also still in this bubble and recovery, trying to play catch up for the time lost, and still, the factories still have not caught up with production because of some of the things I mentioned earlier, and dealing with all of the new ways of doing business and so forth. The supply chains are still, so backed up, and customers are trying to refill their inventories. And because you can't get freight secured as timely as you used to, you're needing to book freight, weeks, if not months earlier than you perhaps once did. So again, normal cycles so disrupted that it's, December was the largest volume I saw in the last 2 years for our office. I think Jason mentioned, 2 million containers moving just in the month of December. Again, I think that's a combination of still being in this catch-up mode. Everybody is scrambling to get things out of Asia before the Chinese New Year. The prices and these premium fees will certainly stick, well until after the Chinese New Year. So I'm seeing freight rates that I've never ever seen in my career. A container last year that was in the area of $3,000 an import you might pay up to $8,000 with the premium to move that container right now. So, again, the good news is that we're seeing a rebound. It's hard, project from, into the long term, how much of that is the economy improving or people scrambling to catch up, from the impact of 2020 and the pandemic. Next slide, please. So that said, what's my crystal ball and freight tell me? Again, everyone, on the freight pricing side, and particularly important out of Asia, pricing is going to stay where it is until after the Chinese New Year. The shortage of equipment and capacity and, getting back into normal rhythms, I agree, is for sure going to go into second quarter and perhaps into third before we start sort of normalizing and see what's really going on in regards to volumes and so forth and the economic recovery. Congestion and delays certainly won't resolve any sooner than that because we've got such a backlog. The trucker shortages in our office are extraordinary. And obviously, that last mile delivery, we often, in my office, we'll talk about that being harder than, getting it here from China and everything else combined. There have been recent scenarios where we've spent an entire day on the phone just trying to move one container from, Chicago to final destination. And, because, the ports are so backed up, there's freight that, there's been photos, again, I think you've got some statistics on this on, the berthing is much longer in Long Beach and in the East Coast. You've got several vessels waiting to unload, and, normal loading to a rail is 2 to 3 days. That we have seen sit as long as 3 weeks on either coast till it gets, from the ocean carrier to the rail, and then add that last mile delivery delay. So it is so challenging for, not just us as a forwarder, but certainly our customers to predict the timing of inventory, the pricing of inventory, and try to anticipate all of these variables, all of which, none of us have much control over. The tariffs, there's no expectation of that changing in the near term with the new administration. President-elect Biden has clearly said he, will be very deliberate and methodic as he looks at that. I encourage, everybody to kind of follow some of the, there's comment periods and outreach on how these costs and delays and so forth, are impacting everybody, and just to speak to your politicians.
Oh, great. Thank you all so very much, Sandy, Steve, Mark, and Jim. But we do have many questions and not so much time. So we have about 5 minutes, 4 minutes for a few questions. And so if I could start, I will send the first question to Sandy. And you talked an awful lot about the uncertainty and unpredictability. And maybe that answers the first part of this, which is, what have been the biggest freight transportation challenges for your operations? The second part of this, though, is, what have been your biggest freight transportation surprises?
Again, the unpredictability is, certainly how I would summarize it. I have a customer who, partly a COVID issue and partly, the arena we're in, that imports product out of Canada that was subject to the, steel and aluminum tariffs. Those tariffs were on again, off again several times as President Trump negotiated, and then we got me out of Canada, and then they, threatened retaliation on agriculture, and then it got changed, at the last minute we changed it. So literally within a 1 month purchasing period, the tariffs changed, 3 or 4 times, in addition to, the pricing on the freight side. And so, and likewise, on goods coming out of Asia, the uncertainty of, the China tariffs, and then there were exclusions granted that, allowed you to be relieved of some of the China tariffs, but, then they went back on, so forth. So, how do you, obviously these additional fees have to be passed on. So, my operations challenge for our office is, for every 1 container we try to move, we spend so much more time trying to secure the space, tracking it. As I said, you've got something sitting on the coast for 3 weeks. Every day we're making sure, is it moved, or, and trying to give customer updates and keep them informed. So, as a service provider, it's trying to keep our customers abreast of what's going on. And I'm sure, Jim will commiserate on this, and, trying to deliver this horrible news on pricing and capacity can be a real challenge if, they're not staying current on what's really going on in our industry.
Well, with that, Jim, do you want to comment on that?
Well, I think Sandy hit the nail right on the head, and we didn't collaborate on our notes. But as I said in my brief presentation, it's a very, very serious challenge when it comes to import-export air cargo today, and the accessorial fees and spot pricing. This is not a short-term pandemic situation. Carriers will push the limits when it comes to raising your rates. I think in building on that, one thing that wasn't mentioned today at all that needs to be mentioned regarding transportation logistics and DOT, whether it's federal or state, is cyber attacks have hit our industry at an unbelievable rate in 2020. There's a company called Forward Air, who's the largest carrier for forwarders in the US. In December, they were hacked and they shut their entire system down for over Christmas and a quarter. That affected all the transportation people on this call, which means it affected all the Wisconsin manufacturers, shippers, exporters, et cetera. So a word of advice is look internally and ask your carriers and providers what they have in place in order to be able to try to avoid the situation that Forward Air went through. So I would put that on the list as one of the biggest challenges. And again, as was mentioned earlier, driver shortage. And there's one other issue, and forget what side of the line you're on politically, is the legalization of marijuana. Is we still have rules and regulations, and even though it's a recreational drug, and I think in Illinois you can smoke it recreationally, you can't pass a drug screen in this state if you get caught smoking dope. So that's my feedback regarding the topic.
Great, thank you, Jim. Steve or Mark, do you want to weigh in at all on that topic?
No, I think those guys hit it pretty well, and one of the things that I saw in the questions was a continued cost to rise this year, and as they talked about, I had several clients this year that got hacked, not in transportation. There's a couple of our customers that did get hacked and got for ransomware, and through our technology and some of the stuff we do, we were able to step in and help them. But it is something that's happening a lot out there right now.
Thank you. All right, well, we do have several other questions, but unfortunately we don't have any more time. We will send these questions out to you though, and share them with you. And if any of the panelists would like to respond to them afterwards, I'm sure we can put the responses up on our link on our website. With that, I will turn it back over to Sean, or I guess I can just go ahead and introduce Alex. Alex is a transportation planner here for the Bureau of Planning and Economic Development, and he will be talking about Connect 2050.
Thanks,
Alex.
Dean. Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. My name is Alex Gramavad. As Dean said, I'm a planner in BPED. I'm the project manager for Connect 2050. It's a current update to the statewide long-range transportation plan that has been ongoing for a few months now. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Perfect. So over the past few months, we've really been conducting our first phase of public involvement, which has been outreach to the general public and our stakeholders that is supposed to give us, I guess, some finger on the pulse of what the public opinions are on various topics related to the entire transportation system. So, which includes freight, but also does include bike ped facilities, highways, really everything. Any component of our state's transportation system is included. So we wrapped up in the end of October, the first phase of public involvement. We had over 2,200 survey responses, almost an equal amount of comments. We did hold 3 stakeholder webinars that have received over 480 views. They're available. They were recorded and they're put on YouTube, on WisDOT's YouTube channel. So they are, a lot of those have come in after the fact, after the presentation was live. We have a website that had almost 8,000 page views by almost 4,000 users. And we held a virtual open house, or it's actually live now, but it's a self-directed, self-paced open house where you can find information about the plan, and that's had over 1,000 individual users. Just a couple of important notes on this is that the survey was not a statistically significant sample. It's purely 2,200 individuals from across the state who responded. We do acknowledge that there might be bias, so we leveraged our social media through our Office of Public Affairs and through our stakeholders to really try to get the word out. And so an example is if bicycle and pedestrian organizations shared this information more on social media or through their committees, we do acknowledge that the results might be skewed towards that type of organization. Currently, no state does, for a long-range plan, a statistically significant survey. We do, obviously, for other efforts. So our National Household Travel Survey, for instance, is a statistically significant survey for data collection purposes. But for a long-range plan, it is much that is not the status quo or the industry standard. So we did receive a lot of comments through our survey and our public involvement management application comment form. We received 156 comments in addition on social media that are not reflected here. The map that's on the screen is shown by zip code. So it's number of responses. The darker darker bubbles are a higher number of responses by zip code. Our urbanized areas, which shows that our MPO partners were probably sharing this information more, had higher number of responses, so within the urbanized areas throughout the state. But we were tasked early on with receiving one comment from each county in the state, and I was happy to report that we actually did that the second week that the survey was live. So we had really good participation and feel really good with the results that we've had so far. Next slide, please. So as a part of the survey, we did this funding exercise. It was really to replicate an in-person, an exercise that you might see at an in-person project meeting. So we gave each respondent $100 basically, and they had these 5 focus areas of the survey and said, how would you allocate this funding? You have a fixed budget and you have these 5 competing areas. How would you allocate the budget? And it was really intended to get folks thinking and kind of put themselves in our shoes a little bit, that we do have competing priorities and we do have a fixed amount of resources available. And the results of that were fairly interesting to me, that they were all within the same ballpark. Nothing was overly skewed. Nothing was $10 and other things 30, that they were all right around that $20 mark, the equitable allocation of those funding. So at least some level of acknowledgement that the 5 priorities in this exercise are all important, and that we shouldn't just ditch one, at least from the public's perspective. Next slide, please. So as far as the survey itself, it was split up into 6 areas, and then it had a series of questions below each survey. And these were the top focus areas, which were the higher level headings that included the questions by the number of responses received. Folks could take or answer as many as they wanted. They could answer, each of the 6 focus areas. They could answer 1, 2, 3, however many they wanted to. So economic vitality and quality of life and natural environment were the 2 highest rated, which everything was somewhat close, as you can see. But the top 4 were really the topics that folks were giving us feedback on. Next slide, please. So from our survey included fixed questions, so I think 5 or 6 generally per topic area, and then we had an open-ended comment box where people could type in basically anything they wanted to relating to that topic area. So these were the top 10 themes from our comments. These do include from our comment form as well, where people could just type. It was an open-ended form where they could submit a general comment. And these are the top 10 topics that were most commonly referenced to us as expected roadway maintenance, but things like access by everyone, rail investment, alternatives to driving, modal connectivity, pretty broad spread of topics, but all of these were very, very important to the general public and those of our stakeholders that did did respond to it. Next slide, please. So currently, we're going through the process of summarizing our public involvement. So going through all of these thousands of responses and comments and kind of comparing them with our current policy direction. We're going to be distributing them internally and informing, and those will all inform the policies that it will be in Connect 2050. And we will distribute them also to our stakeholders to inform state and local plans as well. Our policy analysis phase is where we're looking to analyze and streamline our existing policies. Our current plan has 37 policies, so we're looking to streamline wherever we can. And we're looking to work with others on these and any new policies or identify any gaps that might exist. Continuing to develop trends analysis and then writing the plan policies and supporting materials. So that is where we are currently. Next slide, please. So this graphic was really designed to show kind of our plan for the plan. This is the concept that we have that we're going with. The blue bubble in the middle, I know it might be a little difficult to read, but that's the statewide long-range plan. That is Connect 2050. And then the other greenish bubbles are modal plans and business plans and other planning documents that WisDOT has. And the little yellow bubbles are these technical reports. So the concept is that Connect 2050 is a broad, high-level, policy-focused plan. The policies are the meat of the plan itself, and the discussion within the plan, the narrative, will be focused around what the policies mean and how we might implement them over time. We're not going to be including specific actions. The Connect 2050 is the what, not the how. So the how would be identified for freight related in the freight plan, for instance. We might identify something in Connect 2050 that would be the what WisDOT wants to accomplish between now and 2050. And then the freight plan would identify how that would be implemented over time. So the technical reports then would be linking these planning documents where we have topic specific reports that we might conduct. I'm not sure what a freight related one would be, but some freight related report that would help inform the policies in Connect 2050 for the next plan update, and then the implementation items within the freight plan itself. So that's kind of the connection, that data link between the plan or Connect 2050 and the other modal plans and planning documents. Next slide, please. So as I just mentioned, the Connect 2050 is the what, not the how. So the freight plan and the rail plan in relation to freight would be the main implementation elements, or would identify how WisDOT would implement the policies within Connect 2050. On the bottom of the slide is the Connect 2050 vision, which it's basically an integrated multimodal system, and that's safe and efficient for everybody, minimizing economic or environmental impacts and maximizing economic productivity. So just keeping in mind that this plan is not a freight specific plan, that Connect 2050 really is a plan for the entire state and for the entire transportation system, from airports to ports to sidewalks to roads, everything, trails, literally every component of our transportation system. Next slide, please. So as far as next steps, we are doing the policy analysis. We've conducted, obviously, our first phase of public involvement. We're doing our policy analysis and developing the draft plan. In the spring, we are anticipating going out to the public with our 30-day public comment period, receiving public input and stakeholder feedback, a second round of survey and public involvement, some directed meetings, things of that nature, and then anticipating on adopting the final plan in summer of 2021. So there will be additional opportunities for you all in the spring to provide us some feedback and some input and have your voice heard. And you all were added to the mailing list, so I know at a minimum you've been getting the information, so hopefully you'll be seeing some opportunities for additional input in the spring. So with that, next slide, please. I'd like to open it up for any questions, and I guess a primer question is just wondering if you saw anything in the survey or the results that you'd like to discuss, bring up, things that you'd like us to know while we're here. So with that, I'd like to open it up. Not hearing anything. So thank you all for the time. I greatly appreciate it.
Hey, Alex.
Yes. Hey, Chuck.
Just to confirm, there's opportunity to provide input currently on the plan, correct? Can you talk about maybe how they can do that now if they, heard your presentation here and you have something they think about after this meeting that they want to add? How do they get that information to you?
Sure. Thank you, Chuck. So on our website, which is connect2050.wisconsindot.gov, we have our comment form is available and it's open throughout the entire planning process. So we will be accepting comments. You can send them and I receive them immediately. I know my contact information is also on there, so feel free to reach out to me directly if you have some feedback as well. But to Chuck's point, the comment form is going to be open through the duration of the planning process, just to allow an opportunity and a way for feedback to reach us that might not be directly related to a survey or something else that's ongoing at the time. And those materials are still out as far as the virtual open house, everything on the website, the webinar recordings, all of that is available through the website itself. There's a lot of good information out there that really puts into context what this plan is and what it aims to do for the state. So feel free to go look through that and reach out. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions or comments for me at all. Be happy to receive them.
Well, thank you, Alex. Great update.
Thanks, Sean.
Now we'll move on to talk about the rail plan updates. It's your turn, Diane.
All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Diane Paoni, and I work for WisDOT. I'm the project manager for the rail plan. And let me start by thanking everybody for hanging out with me. I know I'm one of the last presenters, so I appreciate your time today. So as part of this rail plan project, a lot of the people you've already seen today from WisDOT are involved as technical help with this. So I'll walk you through this brief presentation, but do know that Lisa and Rich and Dean and Dave and some other folks are definitely working with me on this as well. So this is a short presentation. Please do use the chat as we go along if you have any questions that come to mind. There's also one of the last slides is an opportunity for us to interact on a particular question. So Sean, will you advance the slide, please? All right, so what I'm working on is an update to the Wisconsin Rail Plan. WisDOT did one in 2014, and this is the first time we've updated it. As Alex just told you, there is his project is Connect 2050, which is an overarching multimodal plan that really kind of focuses on themes and topic areas in a big picture kind of way. The modal plans, like this rail plan, really get into the nitty-gritty of a particular mode. So for the rail plan, we're going to be covering all the different rail modes, rail crossing safety, freight rail, the state-owned rail system, and the three basic kinds of passenger rail we have. Next slide. So our original rail plan was in 2014. Since then, we've had the first freight plan in 2018, and now we're circling back 3 years later and doing the rail plan. So this gives us an opportunity to update some of the freight commodity flow statistics that we worked on for the freight plan. It gets us more into rail specific data trends, some existing conditions. It also is going to allow us to address some regulatory things that have come up since the original rail plan. For instance, the Federal Railroad Administration put out its rail plan guidance just a few months before we actually finished our rail plan. So we'll be kind of integrating some of their important stuff into what this new plan looks like. So having a compliant plan with the FRA rail guidance, it really helps keep the state competitive with any financial funding and grant opportunities that come from the federal government, along with other advantages. Next slide, please. Here's a quick look on what our next steps and our stages are for the plan. We're in the very beginning stages where we're working on our initial issues, identification of trends and issues and the opportunities. There's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that happens at this time where, like I said, we're working on bringing our commodity flow data up to date. We're working on some inventory. We're also starting to reach out to different kinds of stakeholders so that we can start to get your perspective, your insights on what you think the future might hold for rail transportation in Wisconsin. That'll help us put things together with, the data we're getting and start to come up with ideas for the actual plan. Now, once we get to the draft plan phase in late spring, early summer this year is when we're going to have a draft plan for people to take a look at. Sean, next slide. Yeah, so the FRA plan guidance also encourages state DOTs to incorporate and weave together what they came up with for their multimodal freight plan and what they're doing in the rail plan. There's some overlap, and so we'll be working together with Dean's team and Lisa's teams to make sure we get those these two plans working together. Next slide. All right, so we'd really like an opportunity to talk to you guys a little bit and get some of your ideas on what the future may hold for how different trends and changes out there are going to impact Wisconsin. Now, as part of our background work with the plan, we can go online and we can talk to all sorts of people and learn about national trends and, international, worldwide things that are going on. But what do any of those kinds of things really mean here? And as different industry representatives who are out there, in Wisconsin all the time, we thought you might have some helpful insights for us. So we developed this survey tool that's kind of short that you guys can go online and answer a couple of the questions we have. So to give you an idea of what we're kind of asking about looking forward is, connected and autonomous vehicle technology is really out there, is important for modal shift and trucking and the last mile delivery and everything. But when would you think that would affect your business here? Another question we have up there on the survey is about the big CREATE projects going on in Chicago. So the CREATE projects are rail-oriented and roadway-oriented projects that are, they're going to take several years, if not a decade. There's a lot of them to help improve rail freight transportation in Chicago, where there's a lot of bottlenecks and things. So we know that's a huge project that's impacting freight, rail, and truck movements in the Midwest. But how does that make a difference to you? One other thing I want to bring to your attention here is the last bullet, which is we do have some question in the survey about the rail crossing safety action plans. FRA has just come out with this as a new requirement for state DOTs to do a statewide rail crossing safety action plan. So WisDOT will be doing the first one that the state has ever done. And we have a couple of questions to start us off with that. Now, Lisa Stern's group will be leading this safety action plan effort. So you'll be hearing from them in the next couple of months as well. And whatever they come up with this safety action plan, we'll incorporate into this rail plan. So I see somebody actually wants to see our survey link. So next slide there. All right, so I'm going to put this up here for a couple of minutes. It's also, well, for a few seconds, and we have it at the end of this slideshow. Folks who got the packet with all the slides in it, you'll see my slides are towards the end there, and you can see that as well. So there's a few questions on there, maybe about 8 of them, and they're on some different topics. We ask that you fill them out, and if you can at the end provide your contact information, we can get back to you if you have any particular questions for us. So we're almost done with the presentation here, and before I close this out, what I thought we would do is take a look at one of the survey questions and just sort of talk about it a little bit with ourselves at first. So, you know, feel free and go to the actual survey and fill them all out, but let's start off with one to just get our juices going. So Sean, can you give us the next slide? All right, so this is one of our questions on there. What type of infrastructure improvements could WisDOT assist in to improve rail service and operations? One of the things the WisDOT hears from rail providers and from locals all the time is about vertical clearance between roads and rail bridges and other infrastructure. There's a couple of places we've heard about in the States, like in Milwaukee or whatever, where the lack of that clearance for double stack container traffic is an issue. So we're hoping we can get some more ideas if there's other places in the state where you're seeing this as a need or an upcoming need. So if you do have any ideas of that, please do put them in the chat for us as we're going through this. We also were wondering if there were infrastructure improvements for rail bridge operations and maintenance, and its related issue for capacity improvements. So part of what we're trying to get at this is, you know, where is your service developing? And these are starting to, not having these resolved is starting to be an issue for you. WisDOT has a few programs out of the rail section and the economic development section that we might be able to partner with folks to resolve some of these infrastructure issues. So we want to get some information from you guys on that. So Sean, are you seeing very much in the chat there in terms of ideas?
No ideas yet. I do have one question, so whenever you're ready, we can move to questions.
Sure, let's give it a sec here and see if anybody else wants to add in there for us. All right, Sean, why don't we move on to the question? If anybody wants to put some more stuff in the chat box, that's good. We've got another 5 minutes or so. If you'd like to chat us up a little bit about the rail plan.
Sure.
Sean, what do you got for me?
Question posed was, with the sudden closing of the 2 Versa paper mills and the loss of 25% of demand for pulpwood, how does that affect the rail plan?
Well, at this point of the rail plan development, we're getting at existing conditions and how it's different now than it has been in the past. So we're able to take a look at like plant closings or expansions of the new Richmond intermodal facility and start having a conversation about, in the plan, about what that could mean for freight movements in the state. So it will be something that we'll, along with other existing conditions, take a look at in the plan and try to get an idea how WisDOT's programs and policies mesh up with what's going on currently in the state and what we're anticipating will be happening in the future. Okay.
Diane,
mm-hmm.
One of the questions posed was how long the survey tool would be open to folks, and if we're going to be following up with them to send them a link via email and checking back, that type of thing.
Yeah, so Sean, the previous email, please. previous slide, please. There you go. So January 22nd is next Friday, is how long we'll have this up. So it's live right now, so you can go on and do it. We will send out a reminder email in the middle of next week to the distribution list for this meeting, and hopefully you guys will have a chance to share with us your thoughts. One of the questions on the survey asks an open-ended question if there are other issues that you would like us to discuss or consider in the plan. So that's a good opportunity for that. Or you can contact me directly at my email, which is on the last slide. Okay, I think we're pretty close to the end here. Last call for any questions or comments before we get to Sean on the freight plan and a wrap up. All right, Sean, I think it's yours. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Diane. Just a quick update. If I didn't say it before, I'm Sean Destramp. I'm WisDOT's Freight Program Officer. Aside from hosting wonderful meetings, also the project manager for the State Freight Plan. So as this group is very well aware, you were all very much a part of it, as Administrator Nestler pointed out at the beginning of the meeting. You guys helped us with our first State Freight Plan, which the USDOT adopted in March 2018. One provision from the FAST Act is that it be updated every 5 years. So we're not there yet. It's around December of 2022, but now is the time to really start thinking about it now. We have had a few updates. Annually, we update our project list for what we're going to use NHFP funding for, but there really haven't been substantive changes to things like policy, strategy, and I think more globally, how do we integrate with what Alex spoke about before and having this be more of explaining the how of our larger modal long-range transportation plan, Connect 2050. So, of course, as with the first drafting, engagement with the FAC is actually, very, very much encouraged by FHWA. But also, it's really how WisDOT gets the feedback that it needs to really understand what it should focus on. So I don't have a lot to share right now because we're not very far into it, but to just sort of announce that we are going to be moving into that plan very soon. And so if there are things that you want to contribute, we'll certainly do that at our future FAC meetings. So with that, I want to really thank everyone who contributed today and everyone who attended. It was a very informative meeting. I'm going to turn things back to Administrator Nestler because I believe he's going to handle our closing remarks today.
Thank you, Sean. And first to the group, I want to give a shout out to Sean. He is going to be leaving us to take some other opportunity and another opportunity. And he has been, he's pretty new with us, but he has been a calm, competent presence, and we're sure going to miss him. And as you witnessed today, what a great job he's done. So, Sean, I just wanted to acknowledge and thank you publicly. And now, in closing out, really, I want to thank all of you for your participation today, and you can see how, it's obvious how important these issues are. We have a freight plan coming up, and so your input is so important in informing us. So hopefully you enjoyed today as much as I did. We were able to get a briefing on the state of freight in Wisconsin. We heard about trends of key industries that rely on freight. We heard about development in each of the transportation modes, from highways to transit to freight rail to intermodal facilities. We reviewed how the pandemic has affected both freight transport and the industries that rely on it. And last but not least, we reviewed the progress of the state rail plan and the freight plan, as well as our master planning effort, Connect 2050. And while 2020 is recently over, we know that the uncertainty caused by last year's challenges continues. And so while it may be harder than ever to predict the future, I'm confident that the freight industry will continue to respond with innovation and dedication to keep Wisconsin moving, come what may. And we sure saw a lot of examples of that today. We at WisDOT, Secretary Thompson is really passionate about this committee and a freight rail program. So we pledge to continue to listen, to be responsive to your needs, and to demonstrate the same kind of adaptability and focus that your industries have shown. So thank you so much for your participation today, and stay well.
Thanks, everyone.
Good job.